Chapter 461. Path of the Soul. It was an isolated space created for the purpose of testing Earthlings. What caught Soul Jihu's attention was its flow of time.
Time flowed 10 times faster in this world than in paradise.
Meaning, 10 days in this space were equal to a single day in paradise. Soul Jihu used his last divine wish in using the path of the soul as a training ground.
Given the vastness of the place and the number of people that would enter it, there were many things he had to leave out to make this possible.
First, the rewards one could get by passing the trials were all removed. Even if a participant were to reach the summit with their own strength, they would not be able to receive the God-slaying authority.
There was also no need to eat or drink in the path of the soul, but this effect was removed as well.
After all, food could be brought in from the outside. Moreover, as the purpose of using the path of the soul was to train and not test, Soul Jihu's intention wasn't to drive everyone's body to the limit. Zhang Maodong always said eating and resting well was also a part of training after all. Yua. Phi Sora revived at the starting point after dying again. She glared at the mountain with a look of frustration. Currently, there were 7 others training there. Chohong and Hugo were pushing boulders up the first slope, and Yi Sung-jin was blocking the boulders that rolled down with his shield on the second slope. Of course, like Teresa, some weren't going up the slopes but were practicing the grand cosmic shift, which Soul Jihu taught. I don't get it.
Phi Sora furrowed her brows as she looked at Yi Sol-ah, who was running around with Aura on the second slope, having fun dodging the boulders that rolled down.
I know there are differences between warriors and archers, but how?
The path of the soul doesn't affect everyone the same way. Soul Jihu spoke calmly.
The condition of the person taking the trial is what determines it. Everyone has their own desires and limits, after all. Phi Sora bit her lower lip at Soul Jihu's reasonable explanation. Chohong and Hugo are still climbing the first slope for a similar reason. They must have higher strength stat than Miss Phi Sora, but they're still working on pushing their boulders up, right? Well,
that's because we don't need to go through all of the slopes.
Phi Sora pouted, but it wasn't as if she didn't understand.
Soon, she sighed and glanced at Soul Jihu.
Were you really in this place for 7 years? Yep. But you don't need to do it like me. I'm sure you won't take that long anyway. Dear, thanks for believing in me, but can't you give me more realistic advice or something? You know, like I did this, I did that. Soul Jihu made a troubled expression.
After observing for the past few days, he already noticed Phi Sora's weakness. She was a near-flawless all-arounder as the leader of a charge, but she lacked agility. Why aren't you saying anything?
Can't you tell me a thing or two?
It was then. Should I tell you? A snarky voice cut in. A man clad in black armor was walking in from the left.
He looked like a total delinquent the way he bit off chunks of meat from a skewer. It was Black Soul Jihu. None of Valhalla's members were shocked to see him, only a little startled. It was because Soul Jihu had told them about him before they entered the Path of Soul. Although Black Soul Jihu was really a manifestation of future vision, everyone knew him as a helper arranged by Gyula for the trials. The problem was, no one was attempting to get his help.
That's enough whining. You're the one who can't do it.
What do you want him to do about it?
What was that? Whining?
Yes, whining.
What else would you call it?
Listen.
Why do you think you can't climb the second slope even though you have a basic understanding of grand cosmic shift? Don't tell me you don't know. Your agility is already bad, and your reaction speed is generally slow. Black Soul Jihu spoke snarkily with a beaming smile. How can your legs move fast when your body is slow to react?
If I were you, I would focus on dodging and raise my ability to react to quick changes. In fact, I would set everything else aside and do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sleep. You don't even know the condition of the trial and whine about doing worse than Soul Ah. And you're greedy on top of that. Kook!
Listen here. Do you think you can learn ethereal shift by just running like a brainless bull?
Black-souled Jihu shrugged. If you think I'm criticizing you unfairly, keep at it. I've actually seen one guy do that. He just ran day in and day out until he finally mastered it. If it's you, I'm sure it will only take you 2 years of non-stop running.
You're so amazing, huh?
Phi Sora glared. She couldn't find anything wrong with what black-souled Jihu said, but his tone was simply too provocative. Yeah, I'm amazing. I can say this since I'm more amazing than you.
Black-souled Jihu was unfazed and continued to be snarky.
You're welcome to take my advice or throw it out.
And if you're unhappy with me, you know what to do, right? Black-souled Jihu pointed at the spear hanging on his back.
Phi Sora grunted. She wanted to beat him to a pummel, but she didn't dare to start a fight.
It was because, on the first day, she saw Hugo get killed dozens of times after reacting strongly to his sour remark. A dog who can't understand needs to be taught with a stick.
How very humble. Phi Sora spat on the ground and turned around.
Black-souled Jihu chuckled.
That's a lot of temper for someone who's going to be saying, yes, honey tilde in the future. Fuck off. Phi Sora shouted as she ran up the slope. She looked like she was about to break out into tears. I knew this would happen.
Soul Jihu sighed. What are you eating? This?
Fried chicken on a skewer.
Black-souled Jihu put out a plate of chicken skewers as he bit another one off a stick.
Haiju brought it. You should try one too. It's crunchy, and the flavor is out of this world.
Come over here for a bit. What's wrong?
Soul Jihu dragged Black-souled Jihu to an empty spot and spoke quietly.
Can't you be a little nicer? Nicer?
I'm already pretty nice. Don't you remember what I said when you were in their spot? But I wasn't in the same situation as them.
Besides, the training only just started, so they haven't gotten used to it yet. You have to be mindful of that. It's not like I said anything wrong.
Besides, that Sora needs this kind of criticism. Otherwise, she won't get fired up and try harder. But,
never mind. Just don't make fun of them.
Honey was stretching it.
Did you think I was kidding? Black-souled Jihu's voice suddenly sunk.
Soul Jihu jumped in a startle.
Black-souled Jihu emptied the plate before Soul Jihu noticed and was putting a cigarette in his mouth.
He looked somber all of a sudden, like he aged by 10 years.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Cigarette. Didn't you tell me to quit?
Why do you think I'm smoking? Like the saying, getting angry at others for your own mistake. Black-souled Jihu got mad.
Fuck.
I can't even curse you out because it would be like spitting at my own face.
I'm thankful that the future changed, but the result, just how?
Black-souled Jihu sighed uncharacteristically and dropped his head. Soul Jihu tilted his head.
According to Black-souled Jihu, they were like different compartments of a single train. Meaning, the choices Soul Jihu made would affect the future of Black-souled Jihu. Of course, as Black-souled Jihu was a manifestation of the future, his body remained the same as his original future self. It did not reflect the choices Soul Jihu made in the present time. Even so, he was still capable of finding out how the future changed.
Did something bad happen?
When Soul Jihu asked carefully, Black-souled Jihu raised his eyebrow. You.
Then, he spoke. Be careful with this. He tapped Soul Jihu's crotch with the spear shaft. Soul Jihu stepped back, asking what was wrong.
For Yan, Squishy, and Miss Pink.
Fine. They came at you determined, so let's say it was inevitable.
Knowing you, there probably wasn't a way to escape anyway.
Who?
And then there's Win in daytime, Lose in nighttime, Hannah and Miss Pervert. But let's set them aside too. Soul Jihu couldn't make sense of what Black-souled Jihu was saying. But you're no saint either. There's no excuse for Hong Hong and Hug Hug. I can tell who Hong Hong is, but who's Hug Hug? Charlotte Arya, obviously.
Black Soul Jihu smacked his lips.
But, be nice to Hug Hug. She's a real sweetheart.
When things get hard, she's the only one who's always there for you.
It was around this time that Soul Jihu began to understand what Black Soul Jihu was talking about. Wow!
Quote. I thought Haiju would be the only one for you. He knew that Black Soul Jihu was his future self, but he couldn't imagine such a thing happening as Seo Yuhui was the only girl in his mind. Why weren't you more careful? Just how did things turn out that way? It was at that moment that Black Soul Jihu went beyond being incensed and straight up glared at Soul Jihu with a fiery gaze. He looked furious but also frustrated because he couldn't say anything in detail. Bro.
Black Soul Jihu lowered his voice and growled.
You're the real problem here. Why are you like this? What?
Huh. I wouldn't be saying this if it only happened once or twice.
You go with someone without knowing they're preying on you, and then you get devoured.
You get drunk and make a mistake.
You get swept away by the mood, and that leads to another. That's you, not me. Don't be ridiculous.
I'm you.
Don't worry, I'll change that future for you too.
Ha ha. Hilarious. Black Soul Jihu burst into laughter as if he wasn't even amused. I'm sure you will.
Oh right, now that we're talking, let me say something else.
Supernova explosion.
What the hell is supernova explosion?
Aren't you embarrassed?
Soul Jihu's expression quickly turned cold.
He gripped the spear of purity unknowingly. Take that back.
His naming sense being ridiculed was the one thing he refused to take sitting down.
What, you want to go at it?
Black Soul Jihu also gripped his spear, delighted.
Mr. Soul Jihu, you sure grew up.
Take back what you said. You're a big boy now, huh? You think having a high physical level is it?
I warned you.
Shut up and come.
Did I teach you to fight with your mouth?
The two Soul Jihus fixed their posture.
Then, they simultaneously kicked off the ground, disappearing from the naked eye. Clang, clang. Only their afterimages flashed here and there, metallic rings resounding out. With spearmanship alone, Black Soul Jihu certainly might be superior. And the experience and application of skills he gained from countless battles was something that was enough to make up for his lacking physical level to a certain degree. The problem was to what degree.
Black Soul Jihu created an opening in Soul Jihu's defense and attacked, but Soul Jihu struck down with his elbow and counterattacked. When Black Soul Jihu tried to strike back and Soul Jihu suddenly appeared behind him and hit him with his spear shaft, he almost fell backward from surprise. This couldn't be helped as Black Soul Jihu's only X-rank stat was mana, while Soul Jihu's mana was at the divine beginning rank. Since the rest of Soul Jihu's stats besides luck were at EX rank, it made sense that Black Soul Jihu wouldn't be his match.
Indeed, you're in a much higher realm than Sung Shi-hyun. I'm pleasantly surprised.
Soul Jihu spoke truthfully. He planned to beat Black Soul Jihu down from the start, but the latter's flawless spearmanship and movements had made him miss his chance each time.
You son of a bitch. When Black Soul Jihu saw that Soul Jihu was genuinely looking down at him, a terrifying killing intent rose from his body. He roused his mana, intending on teaching Soul Jihu a lesson, but he regretted it in the next moment. For Black Soul Jihu, lightning bolts gathered to the tip of his spear when he used Hell Severing, but for Soul Jihu, the sky itself rumbled. And when Black Soul Jihu was hit with a supernova explosion that he made fun of, he experienced firsthand just how ridiculously powerful it was. Forget countering, he had to spend all his effort just to avoid it.
Having a high physical level really was the be-all, end-all. You really want to do this? Black Soul Jihu, who was charred black, gritted his teeth and released reinforced sword chi. However, The reinforced sword qi that shot out of Sol Jihu's spear of purity was much larger and denser and even radiated a brighter light. Black Sol Jihu became speechless for a moment at the purity of the light.
"You son of a bitch!"
Black Sol Jihu shouted as if he was wronged. It was inevitable for the disciple to one day surpass his master. But he couldn't help but think, isn't this too much?
Asterisk. Quang, quang, quang. Monsters. They're monsters.
Watching the fight that shook both heaven and earth, Phi Sora shook her head and shuddered.
She had failed to climb the second slope again. She was hungry, and since Baek Haiju just brought some food, she decided to take a breather and get some rest. Not long afterward, the wafting aroma made several others gather around it. 4 or so women chatted about this and that. "It's true. I saw it." There was Floan, talking passionately about something. And there was Seo Yuhui, who was gasping with her hand over her mouth, and also Baek Haiju, Chohang, Teresa, Phi Sora. Of course, none of the women present knew yet that this would become the start of what would become known as the court gathering. Quang. "Hey! Why is it so noisy there?
Can't they see we're trying to eat?" Chohang grumbled while cupping her hands over her ears.
"I don't know." The two of them were chatting and then suddenly started fighting. Phi Sora picked up a fried chicken skewer and bit down on it. She couldn't hide her astonishment even as she watched Black Soul Jihu get beaten up with schadenfreude. "I still can't believe it."
"Can't believe what?" "That person."
Phi Sora continued while stammering. "I can't imagine ever being like him."
"How did he get so strong even as a human, like the rest of us?"
Sol Jihu had once said he respected Phi Sora. Phi Sora also respected Sol Jihu. Not as a person, but as an earthling. "He's really amazing, and I'm not just saying this because he's our representative." Who would have thought that an earthling capable of crushing an army commander would appear? Phi Sora stared with a look of admiration before suddenly tilting her head. "But..." She then began to giggle, making Chohang blink in confusion. "Why are you laughing all of a sudden? I mean..." Think about it. Who would have thought he would become like this when we first saw him? "Ah. I see.
What are you two talking about?"
Teresa stealthily joined their conversation.
Baek Haiju, who was sitting a distance away from the rest of the group, also perked up her ears.
"He's actually gotten a lot better these days. He was no joke in the past." "You mean how he searched for breasts like a baby whenever he slept?" "Ah. That too. Listen, the two of us were drinking on Earth, and because he got really drunk, I took him to a motel. You wouldn't believe how much he Kuum." Phi Sora raised her head in the middle of her story.
Baek Haiju was coughing quietly with her hand over her throat.
She looked uncomfortable, to say the least. "Are you choking on something? Do you need some water?" "I got it."
Baek Haiju poured water into a cup with an impatient look.
"Anyway, setting that aside, I think his gifts are what really needs mentioning." Back in Harem arc. Phi Sora shrugged and continued with her story.
"Aw. I got one too."
"Everyone got the same thing, huh?" "Yep. I'm still struck speechless whenever I think about it.
Why the hell would he gift women that?
His taste is strange for sure. What was funny was that everyone got the perfect size.
Why would he give that in the first place, though?
I just couldn't figure it out, so one day, I grabbed hold of him and asked why he gave those to us and what thoughts went behind it. His answer was really something.
What do you think he said?
Ooh, I'm curious.
What did he say? Don't be surprised.
Teresa and Phi Sora chatted excitedly. Meanwhile,
Baek Haiju drank water from the cup, pretending not to care. Dear God, he said his girlfriend was happy to get underwear as a gift, so he thought all girls would love it.
Pooh! The conversation came to a halt again. Chohang, Teresa, and Phi Sora turned their heads simultaneously. Cough, cough.
Baek Haiju, who spat out the water in her mouth, was coughing violently.
Are you okay? Hold on. I think there's a misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding? What do you mean?
No, I mean.
Baek Haiju waved her hands in a hurry. The Cho Hong, Teresa, and Phi Sora trio tilted their heads as Baek Haiju was rarely this flustered.
Only Seo Yuhui made a bitter smile.
Soon, Baek Haiju quietly got up and left with her Tathagata spear, saying she needed to have a talk.
Seo Yuhui took her eyes off of Baek Haiju and turned to Floan.
HMHM.
Fanning her cheeks, which had turned red for some reason. Miss Floan. She leaned over slightly.
Was it?
And then asked while spreading out her arms to the side.
Was it really these big?
Yeah. I saw it. Floan put her hands on her hips and answered. I saw it with my own eyes. 1. As in yandere. 2. Korean slang for someone who is dominant, active during the day and shy, submissive at night. Chapter 462.
Sol Ji-hoo put most of his focus at first in helping everyone get used to the place.
The trials aside, the path of the soul was a place that could easily break someone. Since his mind almost broke as well, he couldn't help but be worried.
And so, he told the others that this place was similar to a neutral zone where one could revive infinitely, and if anyone seemed to be suffering from repeated deaths, he barred them from climbing the slope.
Or at least, he tried to. It's fine. You don't need to baby me. Cho Hong brushed off the hand that Sol Ji-hoo put out and got up. You don't have to push yourself to climb the slopes.
This place isn't a trial space.
I know. I know this place is for training.
Sol Ji-hoo tried to dissuade her, but Cho Hong was adamant.
But you also. She was about to say something but closed her mouth after looking at Sol Ji-hoo. She seemed to be holding back. Anyway, leave me be. It's not like I'm actually dying, like you. Cho Hong shook off Sol Ji-hoo's arm and ran toward the slope.
Sol Ji-hoo still seemed confused. It wasn't as if climbing the slope didn't help, but there were other ways to train, so why was she so insistent on doing things her way? Just leave her be.
She says she wants to. At that moment, a familiar voice rang out behind him.
Black Sol Ji-hoo walked over, yawning with his hands behind his head.
I'm just worried. She'll be fine. She experienced it once before, and now has a clear goal.
Experienced what once before? What goal?
Sol Ji-hoo tilted his head at Black Sol Ji-hoo's vague explanation. Black Sol Ji-hoo sighed. Think, buddy. Earthlings get a wider range of classes to choose from the higher level they become. Right. I suppose I don't need to tell you how important choosing a class path is.
Especially when it comes to unique rankers.
Yep.
Now then, why do you think our happy-go-lucky Hong Hong went with Guardian instead of Paladin, which would fit her style more? Sol Ji-hoo blinked. You don't get it? Quote. See?
You're as dense as a brick.
What was that? You said you wouldn't be done in?
Ha ha ha. Aw, just thinking about it makes me crack up. Black Sol Ji-hoo cackled and then walked off. Sol Ji-hoo snorted before looking back up at the slope with a worried gaze.
However, at the end of the day, Black Sol Ji-hoo was right.
Sol Ji-hoo's worries turned out to be unfounded. Everyone worked strenuously, but they put all their efforts in without giving up. Not only Cho Hong but everyone. Sol Ji-hoo did not know this, but everyone entered the path of the soul with a fierce determination. It should be said that they came in with a different mindset than usual. Sol Ji-hoo's death had been a massive shock to everyone. The one person they thought would never die had come back a gruesome corpse. That was when they belatedly realized just how naive they were to think he would never die. Sol Ji-hoo was not superhuman, but a normal human being like the rest of them. They refused to let the same thing happen again. To do that, they needed power. The power to at least help Sol Ji-hoo and the power to at least bind the enemy's feet,
even if they wouldn't be able to rival them in strength. Soul Jihu had given them this opportunity to grow, so no one dared to take it easy just because it was hard.
They shared the same goal: to become stronger so that Soul Jihu would not shoulder everything alone.
Kiu. Yua. So today, just like every other day, screams and spirited shouts resounded in the path of the soul.
I have to navigate this well. Once Soul Jihu realized he didn't have to worry about the others, he began to think about his own training. He was no longer in a realm where his strength would grow by doing things without a plan. Trinity harmony, a perfect harmony of the mind, technique, and body.
It is indeed an incredible realm.
Black Soul Jihu agreed with him.
But just because you entered that realm, it doesn't mean you are complete. Don't give me I want a clear explanation of what you think Trinity harmony is.
Soul Jihu tilted his head and then smacked his lips. I'm not sure.
You don't know? Not even a little bit?
No. How should I say this?
There's a strange sensation that envelops you like you're in a dream. And inside it, you feel boundless freedom, like you can do whatever you put your mind to.
So you're saying your body knows, but your head doesn't.
Black Soul Jihu spoke clearly.
I guess it can't be helped since that's how you were enlightened. Although you fully achieved it during your fight with Sung Shi-hyun, it was when you were breaking out of the parasite's encirclement that you stepped into the realm about 90% of the way.
Right.
Even then, it's not perfect.
Rather than saying you achieved it with your own strength from start to finish, it was thanks to the Spear of Purity's limitlessness authority helping you out as a stepping stone. Soul Jihu frowned.
Black Soul Jihu had poked him where it hurt.
You're the one who stepped onto that stepping stone and jumped, so don't feel too bad. All I'm trying to say is that you must want to understand your realm better, right?
Of course.
But you don't know how to bridge the gap between what your body knows and what your head knows.
Black Soul Jihu crossed his arms after deliberating for a moment.
Let me ask you something.
What do you want to do? If Soul Jihu replied, I don't know, Black Soul Jihu was sure to curse him out. And so, Soul Jihu said what had been on his mind for a while. First, I want to find my flaws and fix them.
Flaws? Why?
Do you want to learn seamless sublimity? Trinity harmony isn't enough for you? Of course not. I know maximizing your strong suit is an option, but for me, that would be my mana. If I only focus on mana, right, it wouldn't go well with your Trinity harmony. Black Soul Jihu nodded.
Okay, I get what you're saying, but are you only going to work on your flaws?
No, I'm going to ruminate while I fix them. Ruminate on what? On what my mind is thinking, how my techniques are being used, how my body is moving, and how these three things synergize and affect each other. I have a feeling a path will open up if I dig into all of these.
A path to getting stronger, that is. Soul Jihu added with a shrug.
Black Soul Jihu stared blankly for a while. It was because he thought the same thing when he ran into a wall. Hey!
Soon, he spoke with a grin.
Do you remember what you said to me in the past?
When was this? After you climbed the first slope.
You asked if you could learn Trinity harmony if you kept at it.
Did I?
Soul Jihu became embarrassed. Yeah. So, do you finally understand me? What you're worried about now is the same as what you were worrying about back then.
How could I not be angry?
Black Soul Jihu cackled. Soul Jihu coughed dryly. Fine, let's assume you're right and give that a go.
It's not like you don't have any flaws to fix anyway.
You still have a lot to do. Black Soul Jihu stood up. Though, there really isn't much I can teach you at this point. He continued as he stretched his arms. But, I can at least think about it with you.
Then, he suddenly turned to the side. To be more precise, he turned to Little Chick, who was sitting on Soul Jihu's head and looking at him sourly.
So,
I'm hoping you'll unlock the 6th and 7th stage already. What? Don't what me?
I get that this is your mission, but you should know what kind of a guy he is by now.
It's not like the Parasite Queen is an easy opponent.
Or what, are you going to unlock the stages at the very last second again?
Or maybe just before he dies? Let's prepare in advance, alright?
Little Chick sighed.
It did not hesitate for long.
Damn it. If only the situation weren't like this. What a lucky bastard.
Grumbling, it directed its wing to its forehead, where a red and a violet feather were protruding out.
Seeing this, black-souled Jihu smiled gently. He sure is lucky, alright.
Ha! If only I had that spear.
Hearing this, Little Chick paused and snorted. Dream on.
If it were you, bastard, I wouldn't have unlocked the first stage even if humanity were about to be destroyed. What was that?
What? What? Black-souled Jihu and Little Chick began to wrestle.
Soul Jihu stopped them in a fright. Why are you two fighting? That bird head started it. It's that bastard's fault.
When Soul Jihu separated them,
the two of them glared at each other, panting. Getting a little chicky, aren't you? You wanna go?
I entered my adulthood. Let me show you who's your daddy. When they growled and were about to break out into another fight. Time for food. A voice cut in from a distance, saving Soul Jihu from a predicament. Come here, Snowy and Blackie. You too, Taffy.
I brought you your favorite dish.
Come on, guys.
You're not going to fight when there's food, right?
I'll see you afterward.
Same to you. Black Soul Jihu and Little Chick stopped fighting at Seo Yuhui's calling and scurried off with Soul Jihu.
Soul Jihu's intense training started that day. Now that he knew what to do, he began to work hard without rest.
Just like Black Soul Jihu said, there was a whole slew of flaws he could find when he started looking.
He first began with his basic movements, including basic spear techniques. Although he beat down Black Soul Jihu, not being able to do it instantly with his high physical level was a shock.
And once he started digging into his basic spear techniques, he looked at the Spear of Purity in a renewed way. To be more precise, the crescent blade on the side of the spear blade caught his attention. Until now, Soul Jihu thrust, cut, and struck with his spear.
He had never thought about utilizing the crescent blades. He discussed with Black Soul Jihu about this and studied together.
That said, he didn't solely work on fixing his flaws. He didn't forget to get used to the Spear of Purity's 6th authority, Thousand Stream Convergence, and the 7th authority, Spear God. Besides these, he worked on developing new skills or new abilities and sparred with the Parasite Queen in his head based on her description given by Black Soul Jihu.
Of course, Black Soul Jihu was his training partner in all of this. In any case, with so many things he had to do, it wouldn't have been enough even if he had two bodies.
However, the busiest person was undoubtedly Black Soul Jihu. In the beginning, he only paid attention to Baek Haiju and Soul Jihu, but other members started approaching him after listening to the advice he gave. Black Soul Jihu did not turn down anyone who came to him on their own. Jang Maldong once said that knowing something and teaching something were two completely different things.
In this sense, Black Soul Jihu was an excellent teacher.
He did not know how to do things step by step like Jang Maldong, but he was extremely sharp in pointing out areas where someone was lacking and how they could improve.
He was so good that no one could utter a word of complaint despite his terrible attitude. Whenever someone swallowed their pride and asked for his advice, the others would see a noticeable improvement in them, and this naturally caused everyone to seek Black Soul Jihu's help. Of course.
The heck? Why are you coming to me for help? Am I not allowed to? Are you kidding?
How can I teach a magician?
You don't need my help anyway.
You already have an excellent teacher.
There were some people he couldn't teach, like Eun Yuri, who climbed to the peak with her own strength in only 37 days.
Ah!
It's slippery because the path froze over, so you want to make grooves in the ground.
Hey buddy. I think I found your soulmate.
Come here and see.
Aha, so you can't acquire it on your own because you used contribution points all this time like it was some sort of a game.
So what? Get out of here if you can't put up. Go hunt down some parasites and learn with contribution points.
I doubt you'd be able to, though. Fucking hell. I never thought a day would come when I would miss teaching Soul Jihu.
Why did my buddy make someone like this a unique ranker?
I just don't understand. Your representative even died once to make contribution points to help you level up and train. Yet the donkey who took everything for free is resting because it's a little hard.
What a lovely group, Agu, my poor buddy. Despite his foul mouth, no one could deny that Black Soul Jihu taught with passion. As he was the only one who did not need to eat or sleep, there were times when he talked non-stop for 24 hours. Perhaps because of this, more and more people began to climb the slope.
Are you mad?
You must be. Then climb to the summit with your own strength. For anyone who succeeds, I will let you hit me all you want.
Not that it will ever happen. Ha 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 ha. In truth, many of them worked tenaciously just to punch Black Soul Jihu. In any case, there was one thing that was for certain. And it was that everyone was getting stronger by the day. Time flew by.
As a training masochist, Soul Jihu enjoyed every single day that he spent in the path of the soul.
But of course, he knew he couldn't stay here forever. There was now only a day left until they had to leave. There wasn't anything special going on just because it was the last day. Soul Jihu trained until late at night, just like always, before coming back to his tent and preparing to sleep. He only hesitated when he saw Black Soul Jihu before falling asleep. What are you thinking about so much? You saw through me. If you're trying to say thank you for everything, don't. If there's something else you want to say, go ahead. For example, if you want to ask what your chances are in defeating the Parasite Queen one-on-one, I'll tell you that it's about 4 to 6. 4 to 6.
Soul Jihu smiled softly.
Aren't you being too stingy?
I'm being generous.
I was going to say 3.5 to 6.5 but changed it a little since she shaved off some of her divinity last time. Even then, this was only a match because the Parasite Queen was restricted by several factors like the Imperial Oath and the Law of Causality. Originally, the Parasite Queen was a high-ranking god that even ordinary gods did not dare to fight.
Having a 40% chance of victory against a god that once ruled over a galaxy was truly a noteworthy thing. However, what Soul Jihu wanted to ask wasn't about his chance of victory. It was similar but different.
If you have something to say, just say it.
Don't delay it like last time.
I'll think about it.
Soul Jihu smiled faintly before closing his eyes. Soon, the sound of snoring rang out.
To be honest.
Black Soul Jihu grinned and muttered something inaudibly.
The morning dawned. The morning would be spent as a final checkup. The members who managed to climb to the summit numbered 3, excluding Un Yuri.
They were Yi Sol Ah, Phi Sora, and Hugo.
Most of the others managed to pass the second slope, but not the third. In any case, when the portal appeared on the altar, everyone ran toward it with joy. It couldn't be helped since they were in the path of the soul for close to 2 years. Of course, no one forgot to bid farewell to Black Soul Jihu before leaving. The 3 who reached the summit especially did not forget to have the moment they were waiting for. Ow! Ow! Ow!
Those bastards, do they not feel any gratitude toward their teacher? Black Soul Jihu grumbled, but his lips were curled up in a smile. He wasn't sure if even one person would be able to surpass their limits, but with 3 people managing to do just that, he was justifiably elated.
On the other hand, Soul Jihu looked a little regretful.
He wanted to stay in this place for a bit longer, but he knew they had to leave to make it in time for the march.
You should get out of here too. Everyone else left.
Let me finally get some rest," Black Soul Jihu commented.
Soul Jihu didn't like awkward situations either, so he walked toward the portal obediently. Then, he looked back at Black Soul Jihu. "Hey," he asked.
"What happens in the future?"
The future must have changed quite a lot."
"What happened?"
"Is that what you wanted to ask?"
Black Soul Jihu chuckled. "You already know I can't tell you."
"I was manifested by Gyula's power, so I can't divulge such profound secrets all willy-nilly." Black Soul Jihu hopped up.
"But, I guess I can tell you one thing."
He rolled his eyes and glanced at Soul Jihu.
"You've never looked at yourself, have you?" With your innate ability, I mean. After it evolved. Soul Jihu's eyes widened. Come to think of it, he had never looked at himself after unlocking all directions.
He'd just never thought to do so. When you get out, look at a mirror and activate it. You'll at least be able to see what changed. Now you're making me curious.
For the record, there is no mirror here.
Alright, I'm leaving."
Soul Jihu shook his head and walked along.
"Hey!"
Just as he took half a foot into the portal, a voice rang out behind him.
"Did you really think I'd make you fight her alone? I'll at least make it a 5-5.
"Excuse me?"
Soul Jihu turned around reflexively.
"So don't worry about it too much." Inside his ocean-colored vision, Black Soul Jihu was smiling and rubbing the back of his neck while gradually becoming fainter and fainter.
Chapter 463. You got them all honed perfectly.
That was Zhang Maldong's assessment of the members of Valhalla after they returned from training.
And he was right.
Surrounded by enigmatic yet sharp energy, all of them looked completely different from when they first left. The change was only natural, considering the number of times they died, the endless verbal abuse they endured, and the tears they shed while climbing the slope.
Soul Jihu held a strategy meeting as soon as they returned.
During their absence, the Federation sent the entire dwarf race to help restore humanity, while making preparations for the war, including the migration of the World Tree.
It was decided that they would gather in the Hero mountain range.
The travel distance would be shortest for humanity if they crossed the Arden mountain range and joined forces within the parasites' territory. They still decided to congregate before crossing the border in case the parasites tried to destroy the two forces individually. Apart from that, several different topics were discussed during the meeting, but there was only one thing Soul Jihu really needed to pay attention to.
The Parasite Queen.
The outcome of the battle between Soul Jihu and the Parasite Queen would greatly impact the outcome of the war. The Federation and humanity promised to create an environment where Soul Jihu could concentrate on his mission. Their assistance, if successful, would be a great help to Soul Jihu. After the agenda was set, Soul Jihu contacted the royal families and representative organizations of all the cities and asked them to send troops to Eva. He stressed that those who refused the draft call would have no place left for them in paradise after the war.
Soul Jihu thought the procedure would not go as smoothly as he wished.
Surprisingly, however, people from cities all across paradise willingly responded to his request. Sure, the representative organizations were bound by oaths, so they had no choice, but it surprised him that other Earthlings who did not belong to these organizations were also willing to comply. Out of curiosity, Soul Jihu looked into the matter and found out that the news of his victory over Sung Shihyun and his killing of abhorrent Charity had spread throughout Harem. Kim Hannah told him that this incident again reflected Earthlings' tendency to prioritize their interests. They were only participating in the war because the situation did not seem as hopeless as it used to be. If they could come back alive, they would not only be recognized as heroes but would also be able to avoid being labeled cowards. At first, this made Soul Jihu a little bitter, but he soon changed his mind. This was, in fact, solid evidence that he had changed humanity. Humanity quickly responded to Valhalla's request for help, as it was something they were expecting. Harem was the first to arrive. Jan Sactus led the troops to Eva on Teresa's behalf, and the Earthlings from Sicilia arrived next. Agnes benefited from the changes led by Sol Jihu and was appointed the Apostle of Superbia. Another good news was that she was also promoted to level 8, Arachne, in recognition of her services during the Imperial Oath expedition and the war that followed.
Next came Philip Muller of Oder and Yun Tsiora of Scheherazade, each leading their armies.
Grazia and Caligo followed.
Soon the entire humanity gathered in Eva under Valhalla's command. The night before the storm. Your status window. 1. General information.
Summon date, 2017.
03. 16. Marking grade, gold. Sex, age, male, 27. Height, weight, 180.5 centimeters, 75.8 kilograms. Current condition, healthy. Class, LV9. Divine Spear. Nationality, Korea, Area 1. Affiliation, Valhalla. Alias, the adversary, Valhalla's representative, savior of the Federation, Huge, Apostle of Gula, Haramark's war hero, Snowy, training masochist. 2. Traits. 1. Temperament. Self-command. Suppresses emotions, greed, and impulses with the rational will. Superhuman. Unbelievably exceptional in enduring pain and hardship when compared to an average human being. Competitiveness. A desire to win. 2. Aptitude. Effort. Endeavors with both body and mind to achieve a goal. Clear mirror, still water. Possesses a calm, clean mind resembling a shining mirror and still water. Heart and soul as one. Unfaltering and unwavering when concentrating on one thing. Average. Normal in every way. Possesses no particular talent. 3. Physical level. Strength, X. Endurance, X. Agility, X. Stamina, X. Mana, divine beginning. Luck, high, intermediate. Remaining ability points, 4. 4. Abilities. 1. Authorities, 3. Servant, grade unknown, 1. Flaunisha Lusignan La Rothschier, 100%. Godslaying, grade unknown. Gluttony, grade unknown. 2. Innate ability, 1. Future gauging 9 eyes, grade unknown. 3. Class abilities, 12. Awakening skill, Berserk, X. Basic spear techniques. Thrust, X. Strike, X. Cut, X. Nemesis, misfortune delivering curse spear, highest. Nemesis, punishing vengeance spear, highest. Aerial movement, X. Mana spear, multiple, X. Secret art, sword chi wave, X. Explosion, X. Secret art, reinforced sword chi, highest. Explosion, highest. Secret art, mutilation, X. Trinity harmony, grade unknown. One with a spear, grade unknown. Flying spear, grade unknown. Formless spear, grade unknown. Mind spear, grade unknown. Limitlessness, grade unknown. Thousand stream convergence, grade unknown. Ethereal shift, X. Righteous heart, X. 4. Other abilities, 7. Reinforced circuit, X. Grand cosmic shift, X. Hell severing, X. Intuition, X. Thousand thunder, highest. Supernova explosion, X. 5. Level of cognition. Executor, the star of gluttony, the one who leads paradise. Nervous, golden rule. To treat others as they have treated you. A smile spread across Sol Jihu's face as he examined his status window. His weight had returned to normal. It was all thanks to Seo Yuhui's care. Concerned that Sol Jihu had lost too much weight, she made sure he ate well and slept well during their time in the path of the soul. 2 other changes besides his weight stood out more than others.
The first was that the authorities associated with the Spear of Purity moved to class abilities. This suggested that Sol Jihu had mastered these skills completely, though he had yet to learn the seventh ultimate art.
Spear God required a whole new level of mastery, unreachable even with Trinity harmony.
Black Sol Jihu said it couldn't be helped, that Sol Jihu did well enough just to achieve thousand-stream convergence, which united the infinite flow of limitlessness into one. The second was that he raised Thousand Thunder to highest. Black Sol Jihu was originally opposed to this, but since then, Sol Jihu's endurance and stamina had risen to X. Sol Jihu could have raised Thousand Thunder to X if he wanted to, but deliberately stopped at highest to be completely safe. He was thoroughly happy with this change, as even highest significantly increased the destructive power of hell severing and supernova explosion.
But what the hell is Hooge? He recently noticed that the female members of Valhalla giggled whenever he passed them. Few times he caught them glancing at his private area. As Sol Jihu tilted his head, his gaze suddenly shifted to the mirror. He recalled what Black Sol Jihu had said.
What should I do? After much thought, Sol Jihu stood in front of the mirror.
He knew it was better not to look.
But even if he were to lie in bed right now, he wouldn't be able to sleep, as evidenced by the second slot of his level of cognition.
Sol Jihu calmed his breathing and looked into his eyes in the mirror.
Then he activated the future gauging 9 eyes. As his body began to emit golden light,
flash! A vision began to unfold. Asterisk. A fire blazed across the battlefield. On this day, the Red Star, an invader from outer space, finally regained its light. A black fire burned in the sky and swallowed all the stars across the universe, and Earth and one other planet were tainted with blood. A scene from hell unfolded in the center of the crimson light, spreading like watercolor on canvas. Blood was everywhere.
Bodies, their bones shattered and their flesh torn, formed a bottomless mire. This place is.
As Sol Jihu observed the surroundings, he instinctively realized where he was. He was looking at the past, not the future. He was standing on the battlefield of the last war of his previous life. Amidst the commotion, only one spot remained so silent that it stood out from the rest.
There, a man and a woman stood glaring at each other, the space between them filled with tension. "How do you feel?" The woman was the first to break the stifling silence, although she could hardly be called a woman.
Only her face was that of a human.
The rest of her body seemed to have been transformed into a completely different species. I said, "How do you feel?
Answer me."
The creature, believed to have been a woman at some point during her lifetime, asked again.
She sounded rather amused.
"The woman you cherish so much, and the world that you love so much. Both have come to this."
"I'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter."
"Care to speak?"
"Wait a second. That parasite is
Yun Seahui?"
At the same time as Sol Jihu unwittingly muttered to himself, "Pew hook."
Blood spattered.
With a look of disbelief, Yun Seahui looked down at her chest.
A spear had pierced through her lower left breast. The man, now standing behind her, had skewered her on his spear with a completely expressionless face.
Black Sol Jihu. Sol Jihu's eyes tensed.
The moment Yun Seahui felt the cold metal pierce her heart, her eyes shot wide open, then slowly began to close.
Even while falling, Yun Seahui's lips drew a curve, triumphantly grinning at her victory over Sol Jihu.
It was then. Sol Jihu. As Yun Seahui collapsed to the ground, a shadow roared and charged at the man from behind. It moved at lightning speed.
Black Sol Jihu flinched and dropped his spear.
But that was all that happened. The man spun with his fist already clenched, and it landed precisely on the enemy behind him. The shadow fell to the ground.
"Right.
You were here, too." Black Sol Jihu muttered quietly. "Kong Sok." Sol Jihu doubted his ears for a second. He didn't recognize Kong Sok right away because he had turned into a parasite.
It's all your fault.
Kong Sok tried to shout something even as blood spurted from his wound, but Black Soul Jihu wouldn't listen. Same here.
If it weren't for you, the Spirit Realm expedition would have been successful.
His blood-soaked fist smashed down without any hesitation.
Bam!
The parasite's head, wriggling like a worm on the ground, burst in an instant.
Back then.
But the man did not stop.
Once.
At the neutral zone.
Twice. I should have. 3 times. Killed you. 4 times. No matter what. He punched and punched, shouting at the top of his lungs. The one-sided beating ended only after Kong Sok's skull was crushed, and his brain was oozing out. Black Soul Jihu raised his head and glanced around as if searching for the next prey. He picked up his spear from the ground and set out, his feet kicking against the ground stained with pieces of the brain and flesh. He ran into the thick fog, into the swirling ashes, his eyes gleaming like the devil. Asterisk. The sudden and unexpected appearance phased Soul Jihu. When he came to his senses, the vision had already progressed pretty far. He knew exactly what would happen next. Seo Yuhui would come and revive him from his death. But he was wrong. Somebody came before Seo Yuhui. Then why didn't you just grant his wish? Soul Jihu's jaw slowly dropped. O Venerable Gyula! Please grant this earthling's wish. Ah! The royal oath, you haven't forgotten about it, have you? Ah! Ah! When Soul Jihu saw Teresa raise her necklace, he shut his eyes. Now he finally knew. It had taken him too long. The vision ended there. Feeling perturbed, Soul Jihu stepped out of his room and headed for the garden. He sat alone and fell into contemplation. He went over the things he had just seen in the vision. He thought about Yun Siohui's triumphant smirk, about the things that Kong Sok never got to say, and maybe I shouldn't have seen it in the first place. He couldn't figure out why Black Soul Jihu had suggested that he take a look at it. Soul Jihu sat still for a long time. Yap! Until somebody tapped on his shoulder from behind. What are you doing here alone? He quickly looked up in surprise and saw Teresa sit down next to him. Princess? I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd go for a stroll. Then I saw you. Teresa poked Soul Jihu's elbow. You too? Ah! I just had some things to think about. That's surprise. Teresa stopped in the middle of her sentence. I mean, of course, since you're human, too. She rested her head on Soul Jihu's shoulder and brought her face close to his. Maybe the two of us insomniacs should keep each other company. Luckily for you, I know just the way to help you relax and sleep well. What is it? You know what I'm talking about. I want you to say it. Sex. Soul Jihu smiled, and Teresa giggled. That's right. What are you going to do when the war is over? It was an unexpected question. He'd never thought about it before. After he defeated the Parasite Queen and won the war. Is there anything you want to do? Or want to be? Something he wanted to do or wanted to be. All of a sudden, Soul Jihu began to blink rapidly. Still, nothing came to mind, but his head felt clear again, free of all worry and anxiety. It was a strange feeling. I'm going to become a queen, you see. He realized all his worries were for nothing. Not just the queen of Harem. Soul Jihu looked up at the night sky as he listened to Teresa's chatter. Until now. He always looked up, even when he was walking on a bumpy path. Now, a future as bright as the stars in the night sky was right before his eyes. But he felt uncertain. He just needed to take one more step but wasn't sure if he could win against the Parasite Queen. In fact, the chances of him losing were far greater than that of winning, and it pained him just to think about what would happen if he lost. He had sacrificed so much to get this far. He couldn't let everything go to waste because of a single loss. Only Black Soul Jihu seemed to have noticed Soul Jihu's worries, which he tried to hide from others. I won't do that. That was all in the past. Now I have to look ahead in the future. Suddenly, Teresa's voice flowed into his ears. Ah! Was this why Black Soul Jihu wanted him to look at the vision?
Don't worry too much. Soul Jihu finally understood.
The past was just that. The past. Even something as trivial as the flapping of a butterfly's wings could eventually set off a storm, and the changes Soul Jihu had made until now had gone well beyond that in terms of scale.
So, of course, the future would have changed. That's right. Whatever the outcome, it would be better than it was in the past. So don't obsess over the past you've never experienced and move forward, as you always have. That must have been what Black Soul Jihu wanted to tell him. He was right. Soul Jihu had nothing to be afraid of. You're not going back to Earth just because the war is over, are you? Just as he finally managed to calm down, a pleasant voice rang out.
No, you can't go. I won't allow it, Teresa announced. If you really have to go, at least leave behind a child.
Then I'll be able to carry on raising our child.
Soul Jihu gazed at Teresa, pouting with her arms crossed over her chest. He still remembered the first time they met.
Even now, he couldn't help but wonder what made him do the things he did. He followed Teresa to the battlefield when he was only level 1, and volunteered to be a bait to save her.
I always wondered why I felt so compelled to be near her.
Who knew something like that had happened?
Soul Jihu gave a small smile.
Why are you laughing?
Princess, you. Ah. I know what you're gonna say. You
must like me very much.
A look of shock spread across Teresa's face.
This time again, she thought he would say, "Pardon?"
But she became the one to say it. I don't know.
Soul Jihu continued. I don't know what I'm going to do or what I'm going to become.
I'll think about it when the war is actually over. And that's also when I'll be able to tell you how I feel about you, princess. Teresa's eyes widened.
He didn't evade the subject.
Because.
Suddenly, a cool breeze blew by and ruffled both their hair.
Here in the moonlit garden. Tonight.
Brushing his hair off his forehead, Soul Jihu.
I can't think of anything other than tomorrow's battle. He stretched out his arm and smoothed Teresa's hair with his hand.
Princess?
Suddenly, his gaze shifted to Teresa's face. Teresa was staring into Soul Jihu's eyes with a dreamy look on her face. Her lips parted slowly. So cool. She muttered in a small voice that Soul Jihu did not hear. The blush on her cheeks was pink under the bright moonlight.
Why can't you just?
No, never mind. He could be mistaken, but Soul Jihu thought he saw hearts in her eyes.
You're right. It doesn't have to be now. Even her breathing was getting heavier.
I brought this just in case.
Though Teresa's face remained completely mesmerized, her hands moved with agility.
She took something small and square out of her pocket. All right, mister. I'll let you off the hook for today.
What was she talking about?
And why was she suddenly speaking like that? Soul Jihu only realized something was wrong when Teresa showed him what was in her hand.
But this is okay, right? What do you mean? Don't worry.
I didn't puncture it or anything. Rip.
Without hesitation, she tore the wrapper, and a round, translucent, rubber-like object popped out of it.
Ha! Soul Jihu's eyes widened in an instant. Asterisk. Chirp, chirp. Morning dawned with the sound of chirping birds.
As soon as Soul Jihu got up, he began preparing for the departure. He felt great. Last night he was able to relax and sleep well thanks to Teresa. This morning, the streets of Eva formed a magnificent sight. Troops from all cities, except Nur, which had been completely destroyed, were gathered, and tents were lined up not just inside but outside the city walls as well.
Let's go."
After all preparations were made, Sol Jihu led the members of Valhalla outside. That day, humanity began to march toward the Harem mountain range. Their goal: total destruction of the parasites. The battle to mark the end of the long war had finally begun.
Chapter 464.
Having left Eva, the human forces joined up with the Federation at the Harem mountain range. The full power of the two nations together created an enormous force that was a spectacle to behold. Lines of troops connected from one end of the mountain range to the other, making literal sense of the phrase "sea of people forming a mountain."
The war had already begun.
To be more precise, it started when they stepped into the parasites' territory. The corrupted land consumed the vitality of non-parasites in its domain. The effect was minimal since the Allied force was still at the border of the parasites' territory, and the Federation had brought a countermeasure as well.
But the situation was bound to get worse the deeper the Allied force went into the Empire. Furthermore, there was a good chance time would bring about a change. The Allied force was marching into the enemy territory, yet they couldn't see a single parasite. Not even a single cockroach or a bug.
This wasn't a good sign. The parasite queen's intention was clear.
She wanted to make full use of the corrupted land's effect.
Since her enemies were invading her land, she must be planning to sit back and drain the Allied forces' strength as much as possible.
It was a logical decision, as expected of the parasite queen.
A few days went by.
The situation everyone feared occurred.
When the Allied force entered the central region of the Empire, more and more people began to fall behind from fatigue. While Seo Yuhui left to tend to the patients, Sol Jihu got a report from Kazuki.
"What's the number?"
"Not the people who are simply fatigued, but the people whose conditions are severe to the point they can't participate in battles."
607 from our side and 178 from the Federation side. So that's 785 people.
It's less than I thought.
Because we have this.
Kazuki took out a palm-sized leaf from his pocket.
It was an item that the Federation had prepared, a leaf imbued with the blessing of the World Tree. Simply possessing it delayed the vitality-stealing power of the parasite's corrupted land. The Allied force was thoroughly enjoying this effect.
The only problem was that the leaf wilted black in less than a day, having to be replaced by a new one.
"How many do we have left?" "I heard the Federation brought their entire supply."
"I don't think we have that many left." "The Federation is trying to conserve as many as possible in consideration of carrying out missions after the war starts." Gabriel said it was a miracle that we even have any left.
"If it wasn't for Lady Seo Yuhui."
Sol Jihu turned around. In the far distance, he could see Seo Yuhui chanting a holy spell on a group of heavily corrupted individuals.
Level 9 Saint Empress class ability, Wide Area Purification, Descent of Brilliance.
This was the new skill Seo Yuhui obtained by being promoted to a Saint Empress. Although it couldn't turn a parasite back to its original form, its powerful purification ability could heal anyone if the corruption had only progressed halfway. Just like Kazuki said, it was thanks to Seo Yuhui that they could save so many leaves.
"It can't be helped."
Sol Jihu sighed.
He had expected this much from the start. He knew he wouldn't be able to take care of every member after coming this far.
"Tell the Federation to prioritize magicians and priests, who have weaker endurance and stamina. As for the ones who can't join the battle, send them back before it's too late."
Sol Jihu spoke while being relieved that the worst-case scenario had happened. "Got it. I will relay the message."
Kazuki nodded while taking out a communication crystal. Another few days went by. The Allied force marched onward without any hindrance, and they were now crossing Via Lactea. This was the place that the expedition team of the Second Imperial Oath Expedition teleported to, and it was no different than the heart of the parasite's territory. The capital of the empire, Gloria Eterna, which became the final bastion of the old empire's defense, was now just around the corner. The parasites were still nowhere to be seen, but Seoul Jihu could feel them. The temperature plummeted as they headed deeper into the capital, and the gray color dyeing the land turned thicker as well.
Furthermore, the earth seemed to be made of hard pebbles rather than dirt, and the speed at which the world tree's leaves burned up hastened as well. Seoul Jihu slowly raised his head, an inexplicable sense of foreboding creeping up on him crushingly. The clouds of war were gathering in the sky. And Seoul Jihu's hunch came true quickly. In just a few hours, the frontline troops stopped. It was because the scouts returned with news of discovering the parasites.
The Allied force buzzed. Jan Sanctus.
Lead your men to the front. The Thunder Squadron will fall back behind the central line and set up camp. Teresa, Vidalov, and other commanders shouted.
They were changing the troops' formation at the sight of the enemy's large-scale appearance. Seoul Jihu's eyes narrowed as he walked to the front, cutting through the nervous, stiff bodies of the frontline troops.
The first thing he saw was a wall several times longer and taller than the one in Eva. He also saw black things that looked twice as large as usual. Right, they were parasites, covering the land and the sky as if to swallow the vast capital. There was the corpse army, composed of all kinds of foreign races. There was the parasite army, stretching out far and wide, not distinguishing between the sky and the earth. There were Medusas, Temerators, and Regina, constantly giving birth to new creatures. And then there were the nests, giving birth to these mother species. There was unsightly humility standing at the forefront, exploding patience and vulgar chastity taking up the wings, and the army commanders' personal armies. And finally, sitting in the air above the wall, arrogantly looking down at the Allied forces, was the parasite queen. Creating such a large-scale force in such a short time. Seoul Jihu chuckled after scanning the enemy army from left to right. Not much time had passed since the major defeat at Harem. Seoul Jihu realized just how the empire letting their guard down led to their demise. The parasite's reproductive ability was simply too terrifying. The enemy army was one thing, but what really made the Allied forces buzz was the appearance of the parasite queen. For several years, she had not appeared on the front lines. Now that she had, her presence was enough to make every member of the Allied force stiff with nervousness. And because she was openly revealing her rage at the insects that dared to invade her territory, ordinary humans and foreign races shrank back. They had no choice when a god, who was on a higher level of existence than even the seven sins, cast her energy down on them. Even Seoul Jihu's body was trembling faintly, so it would be wrong of him to expect ordinary humans to be calm. The situation wasn't good. Although the Allied force resisted the corrupted land's effect with the purification power of the world tree's leaves, most people were feeling tired before the battle even began. And with the parasite queen exerting such tremendous pressure, the Allied forces' morale plummeted in an instant. What should I do? Seoul Jihu, who was watching silently, suddenly felt a soft touch on his hand. Glancing to the side, he saw Seo Yuhui gazing at him. Facing off against a great, vast enemy force, the man and the woman exchanged a look while staring fixedly at each other. Sometimes, a single glance was worth 1,000 words. Seoul Jihu let out a light sigh. Then, he walked forward. Gabriel predicted the Allied forces' morale to be at its lowest upon first encountering the parasites. As such, she asked Seoul Jihu to prepare an encouraging speech, but that went against what Seoul Jihu was comfortable doing. Still, Seoul Jihu was the representative figure of the Allied force. This could be seen just by looking at his status window's level of cognition. His comrades saw Seoul Jihu as a leader. Reading the explanation, the significance of his existence wasn't just confined to being the apostle of gluttony but rather the entirety of paradise. This could be seen just by looking at the Allied force. Most who chose to participate in this war only did so after seeing Seoul Jihu. As such, Seoul Jihu had the duty to prove his worth as the leader who shouldered the fate of humanity, the Federation, and paradise itself. Tap. Tap.
As Sol Ji-hoo walked forward, countless gazes fell on him. After coming to a stop, Sol Ji-hoo roused his energy. Then, a fascinating scene occurred. Just by revealing a bit of his fighting spirit, Sol Ji-hoo caused the parasites' frontline forces to step back. The parasites in the air also buzzed their wings and became disarrayed.
The members of the Allied force widened their eyes and swallowed hard. Parasites were incapable of rational thought.
Still, they had taken a step back, feeling an instinctive fear.
Even the army commanders flinched slightly and raised their guards noticeably. But perhaps, such reactions were to be expected. Sol Ji-hoo had once crushed through the parasites' army alone. Now, he was back, stronger than ever before.
The important thing was that the parasites, who always treated humanity and the Federation as though they were insects, openly showed apprehension and fear.
To the Allied force, this was a refreshing shock.
That wasn't all. Everyone could clearly feel that the battlefield encompassing the two sides had transformed into a strange space where no sound traveled. Here, only indescribable vibrations were resounding out.
Furthermore, everyone could distinctly feel that a powerful, boundless energy had taken control of the area.
Wang, 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 Wang. Then, just as 6 formless undulations burst out of Sol Ji-hoo, Kwang.
A thunderous sound suddenly struck everyone's ears.
A brilliant electric discharge erupted from Sol Ji-hoo's body at the same time that a giant orb, radiating a light that was brighter than the sun, rose from the ground.
Sol Ji-hoo's unique spatial ability, supernova explosion. The orb detonated and shot out a terrifying energy in all directions. The burst of mana swam through the air and fanned out far and wide. Impossible.
Setting aside the terrifying speed at which the energy swept across the air, vulgar chastity screamed at just how far-reaching it was, encompassing all of the parasite's forces.
He got stronger again.
Exploding Patience's face sank in despair.
We have to stop him.
Remembering what happened after taking the same thing head-on, unsightly humility hurriedly raised his sword.
Twisted Kindness did the same. She created hundreds of magic circles reflexively but did not know what to do with them. It wasn't as if there was a lot of time. She just couldn't think of a way to stop such a wide-range attack in an instant. Even as the army commanders were startled and taken aback, Sol Ji-hoo's energy wave was shooting toward the parasites.
However, just as it was about to make contact, a giant shadow suddenly cast over Twisted Kindness. Kwang! A terrifying explosion erupted again.
Twisted Kindness blinked in confusion.
The explosion that was about to swallow the parasites suddenly stopped in front of their army.
Quare! It was disappearing while splitting left and right. It was as if an invisible barrier was keeping it back.
After spectating the intense undulation, Twisted Kindness subconsciously looked back. The parasite queen was standing with her arms stretched out.
She had interfered directly since the army commanders were helpless against the attack. Her hand shook faintly as it blocked the supernova explosion. The alien goddess and the godslayer met each other's eyes.
The parasite queen's eyes narrowed, and Sol Ji-hoo grinned. Seeing the absurd explosion that rendered the entire world bright, the members of the Allied forces all widened their eyes as if they just woke up from a dream. This was because the parasite queen destroyed the energy from Sol Ji-hoo's supernova explosion, which had joined up with his authority to take control over the land. What the Allied force saw now was a tug-of-war between the chief commander of both sides. Their widened eyes, bloodshot from fatigue, then began to look determined.
There was someone among them. An existence that could fight with the parasite queen on equal grounds. The rumors were not a lie. They were seeing it now with their own eyes. And with this, an inexplicable sense of pride welled up in everyone's hearts. Sol Ji-hoo retracted his mana, noticing the morale of the Allied force rising. By the time the aftermath of the explosion subsided, he had activated his innate ability. He was curious about what the future gauging Nine Eyes thought about the situation. Would it be red, orange, or yellow?
However, the result went against Seol Ji-hoo's expectations. Several colors popped up, but one color was overwhelming the others.
Seol Ji-hoo turned around with a slightly surprised look. The Allied force was burning with a fighting spirit.
Glaring at the parasites with a sharp gaze, they breathed heavily and held their weapons high.
Seol Ji-hoo could tell that they were ready to rush out at any moment. In this very moment, the hearts of the Allied force had become one. Turning to the front again, a faint smile hung on Seol Ji-hoo's lips.
He couldn't help but feel a little refreshed. Right, it was a completely different feeling than when he fell into the enemy's trap. The dwarves were aiming their cannons, cave fairies and sky fairies were preparing to summon spirits, beastmen were honing their claws, getting ready to charge forward, and the fallen angels were preparing to transport the world tree. The earthlings were led by 5 executors, and soldiers of 6 kingdoms were ready to give their lives for their planet. His precious comrades were ready to protect his back at a moment's notice. Then, there was Seol Ji-hoo himself.
They were all shining in a golden light.
A golden current was undulating in the empire.
The scene was so beautiful that it would take away the breaths of anyone watching.
Seol Ji-hoo did not hesitate any longer. He raised his hand, holding the spear of purity into the air. The spear blade, reflecting the light of the sun, radiated a blinding, cross-shaped light. This was the cue signaling the start of the war. Without a moment of hesitation, Teresa pulled out her silver longsword. Then, she shouted,
"Cha-arge! Do-do-do-do-do-do!"
The sound of angry bulls stampeding through the ground and the clacking of horseshoes resounded.
"You-wah!" The combined shout of the Allied force shook the heavens and earth.
The battle that would determine the fate of each side and the future of paradise finally began.
Chapter 465. The Allied force started the attack.
The curtain of the final act was finally lifted. The cavalry unit led by Teresa charged forward like a raging bull, causing the battlefield to rumble. Behind them was the infantry of the 6 kingdoms, following wholeheartedly with their spears and shields raised into the air.
"Charge!
Do not fear death."
Teresa raised her silver longsword high and shouted.
"Your parents, your brothers and sisters, everyone in paradise is praying. The day they have been waiting for is here."
Lowering her sword, she pointed the blade toward the parasites. "This war shall be remembered for generations to come.
Today will be the day of a glorious victory, the day we regain our home, paradise.
The world shall remember that we were the vanguard of this great war." Teresa shouted at the top of her lungs. The soldiers cheered back, boosting the morale of the troop, and the Horuses also neighed strongly. The parasite queen's eyes narrowed. She did not like what she was seeing.
The insects that were openly showing exhaustion, the worthless humans falling into despair from her presence, were now charging toward her with their lives on the line. Their actions strongly offended her honor and put her in a foul mood. "What are you doing?"
The parasite queen waved her hand roughly, her voice openly revealing her displeasure. "Fire!" The squadron of evil phantoms aimed their arms at the incoming cavalry.
Ta-ta-ta-ta-tang! Several gunshots rang out.
Screams erupted from multiple places. Flag-bearers flew back with holes in their chests, and the Horuses fell and rolled on the ground, causing a chain reaction of the Horuses in the back to trip over them and fall. The cavalry unit charged forward without minding their comrades' sacrifices, but the evil phantoms continued to shoot endlessly as well. Their bullets pierced through the layers of barriers cast by priests, sending the cavalry into disarray, and this naturally slowed down the infantry following behind them. There was still some distance to go. The troops' charging speed decreased faster than she anticipated, but Teresa clenched her teeth.
This was only the start of the battle, and she knew there was no way the Allied force would just watch them be decimated. "What are you doing?" At that moment, Vidalife's voice resounded behind the central troops.
"Are you going to let them die?" Hurry! He raised his voice and personally placed a blue rock into a cannon. Once the dwarves standing beside the cannon hurriedly aimed the muzzle, the sky fairies behind them instantly chanted a spell. Fire until the muzzle turns red. Pang! 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 The cannon aiming at the parasites belched out a raging flame. Next, the sky fairies aimed their cupped hands toward the flying thunders. Yu-jin acceleratio. A fierce wind stormed forth. Shriek! The thunders, accelerating with the power of wind spirits, swept toward the parasites. Flash! Blue flashes erupted everywhere, obliterating everything they touched. Not only that. Maintain this altitude. Turn 30 degrees to the left. Fire! Hundreds of ballistas fired boomerang blades one by one. Fire! Do not hold back and use everything. And spirit arrows shining in colorful lights rained down from the sky. The parasite queen grunted quietly. The allied force seemed to have scouted their formation in advance, as more than half of the evil phantom squadron had been eliminated. Furthermore, the boomerang blades were sweeping through the parasite ranks, and arrows were raining down as well. This naturally slowed down the evil phantom's firing speed. Teresa's complexion brightened. The soldiers beside her supported each other and rushed forward. Second Army. Kaduk! The parasite queen gritted her teeth. Crush them! Unsightly Humility swung his sword as soon as the queen gave her order. Krrrrrr. The spectral horse raised its front legs threateningly and then stomped down. Yu-woo! Unsightly Humility's undead army charged forward. They had no intention of clashing with the enemy army. In the next moment, the bodies of the undead army turned translucent. Fluidization. The barrage of boomerang blades and arrows all phased through the undead army. Fluidization allowed them to gain immunity to both physical and magical attacks. As long as the opponent had no way to attack the bodies that were moved to the spectral realm, there was no way to do any damage to them. Even if a few were capable of using soul manifestation type magic, there wouldn't be enough of them to affect the entire army. And so, they would destroy the humans and foreign races from within and reach their main camp in an instant. That would be the start of an indiscriminate massacre, just like they had always done. Charge! Unsightly Humility charged forward without doubting what would happen from now on. However, his enemies also charged in unperturbed without slowing down. Seeing the cavalry racing in, a hint of doubt flashed on his face. He expected them to split to the side to avoid clashing head-on, but Haremark's princess was speeding so fast that the pendant on her necklace was fluttering. Flown! Teresa shouted when the distance between the two armies shortened to about a couple hundred meters. A voice rang out from the pendant she got from Sol Jihu. Let's go, guys! Flown flew out of the pendant with a puff of black smoke. Unsightly Humility's hollow eyes flashed in confusion. A strange smoke cloud had shot up in the air, and it was now expanding tens, no, hundreds of times in size. Kia! Ki! A chilling cry that seemed to originate from the depths of the abyss resounded out. Indescribable despair filled the battlefield in an instant. The Vengeful Spirit Unit. The first card that Sol Jihu prepared was revealed. That's... Unsightly Humility could not hide his shock. He had not seen it wrong. As the king of the undead, he could feel what kind of existences these vengeful spirits were. He was faced with an unprecedented situation. Unsightly Humility pulled on the reins and commanded his spectral horse to stop. However, the group of vengeful spirits, led by Flown, were flashing their bloodshot eyes and pouncing on the undead army. Kekikiki, kekikiki. One vengeful spirit clung onto a ghoul. Then, something surprising happened. The translucent ghoul stumbled to the ground. It resisted the vengeful spirit fiercely, but the ghoul's arm phased through the spirit's body. Unhindered, the vengeful spirit's mouth split open to the ends of its ears, and it swallowed the ghoul's head whole. The ghoul's body went limp, quickly regaining its original color. Similar scenes were happening all over the place. Ghouls, doolahans, skeletons.
Some undead species like the wraiths fought back, but most of them were falling without being able to lift a finger. After devouring a victim, the vengeful spirits flew off in search of new prey, and the cavalry unit stomped past the twitching bodies of the ghouls. A scene that was the complete opposite of unsightly humility's imagination broke out.
No way.
He had to admit reluctantly that fluidization had been broken. The Second Army, which had always stood at the forefront of the battles, was now being beaten back helplessly.
Unsightly humility quickly shook off his stupor and faced the cavalry unit crossing through the undead army. He never thought that the Allied force would have developed a vengeful spirit unit to counter his immortal army. If only abhorrent Charity were here.
He couldn't help but regret the death of the 4th Army commander, who was a skilled necromancer. Death Knights, wraiths, and a couple of other species were able to fight back, but the situation wasn't in their favor. He just witnessed a particular vengeful spirit that was dozens of times larger than the others, sending a Death Knight flying with a punch.
Unsightly humility could no longer sit still.
It was because a vengeful spirit, much bigger than the previous giant one, was coming for him. Just as he fell back to avoid the charging black smoke, Quang! An intense shockwave shook the spot he was just standing on.
Ha ha!
The Star of Wrath, Wu Lei, burst into laughter with his greatsword stabbing into the ground. An executor had appeared.
His spectral horse cleverly leapt away and escaped the range of the shockwave. However, a purple magic circle appeared in the air, summoning a group of fully armored battle maidens. Unsightly humility swung his sword in a wide arc, pushing aside the attacking Valkyries.
But because of the Valkyries, he failed to see thin threads creeping forward at breakneck speed and tying the spectral horse's legs. After coiling around unnoticeably, the threads then became tight.
Prrrr. Shoot!
By the time unsightly humility noticed, the spectral horse was already being dragged to the ground.
The problem was that this was only the beginning. Unsightly humility turned around abruptly to save his steed, and the black smoke that was hurling in toward him grazed past him. Crack!
His left shoulder was torn off with a bone-crushing sound.
Unsightly humility landed on the ground after barely picking himself back up, then tilted his head.
You're not very tasty. A terrifying ghost with hundreds of years of vengeance was munching on the left arm of unsightly humility.
But well, an army commander is an army commander.
I'll eat it since it's good for my body. Judging by how her energy was increasing with each bite, she seemed to be a servant of gluttony.
Although unsightly humility lost his arm from a moment of carelessness, he quickly assessed the situation and made a judgment. I can only feel half of the energy of gluttony. There must be another one.
Knowing that the authority of gluttony was distributed evenly among servants, unsightly humility stood on guard and clenched his teeth. Having lost an arm, he no longer dared to be careless.
It was certainly a mistake on his part, but he never imagined that such a threatening attack would fly at him in all directions.
You said 1 executor and at least 4 servants were needed to buy time against you. Do you remember that?
Chinzia stepped up to the front, guarded by an entourage of Valkyries.
Well, what do you think? Seeing unsightly humility, who was stiff like a stone statue, she spread her arms out.
I didn't know what you'd like, so I prepared all sorts of things. Looking around at the group, unsightly humility clattered his teeth. There were 3 executors of the 7 sins.
Agnes, who was once the servant of sloth, had become the star of pride. There were at least a dozen servants following the 3 executors, the servant of gluttony whom he had to be extra careful about, and a powerful evil spirit that was continually getting bigger. Unsightly humility became lost for words for a second. What an honor!
Then, he fixed his grip on his sword and grinned.
This is more like it.
I appreciate the treatment worthy of my status.
Appropriate? You don't think we're overdoing it? That remains to be seen. Unsightly humility began to emanate a fierce energy.
I have no intention of falling easily. Well, I will admit that I was a little surprised. To think you would invest so many resources into stopping me. He seemed to be asking what they planned to do about other army commanders.
Who knows? Why don't you find out?
Chinzia spoke leisurely and shrugged.
Don't think stalling for time is all you need to do.
Flashing a beast-like pair of eyes, she grinned. We have enough in reserve to last in the other 3 places while we take care of you. Unsightly humility's eyes flashed deeper.
The Allied force had just revealed that he was their first target.
And what does that?
Hey! What are you trying to pull? At that moment, Floan's voice cut off unsightly humility. You're trying to buy time, aren't you? Do you think we'll fall for it?
Unsightly humility flinched. Floan was right on the mark. No can do. Floan pointed at him and shouted. Gorganu! Sick him! The large vengeful spirit from the ancient emperor's villa pounced on unsightly humility.
Same time. The parasites fell into disarray as the 2 armies clashed. The Second Army was broken through for the first time after having boasted an undefeated record. Seeing that it wasn't looking good for unsightly humility, Exploding Patience, who was in charge of the left wing, could not stand still any longer. To prevent the Second Army from being decimated, the Fifth Army's troops were needed. After all, banshees were also cursed souls like vengeful spirits. Since the Allied force invested such a huge task force in dealing with unsightly humility, there shouldn't be anyone capable of simultaneously standing their ground on the left and right wing. But would he stay still?
She was worried about Sol Jihu but immediately shook off the thought. One had to look at the grand scheme of things in a war.
Someone of Sol Jihu's caliber taking his time to deal with her would be more than worth it for her allies.
She fully believed that the Parasite Queen would not miss this opportunity.
Having organized her thoughts, Exploding Patience left behind the Parasite and Corpse Army and only went with her Fifth Army to reinforce unsightly humility.
Rather, she tried to. She came to a sudden stop just as she was flying toward the center.
What? Seeing the Allied force, the Banshee Queen's eyes widened in shock.
Chapter 466.
Just as Exploding Patience was about to order the Fifth Army to charge, a fairly large group of soldiers broke away from the Federation's main force, as if they had been waiting for that instant. Exploding Patience furrowed her brows as she looked into the distance. On land, a group of cave fairies led by Yuiril was charging straight at her in a T-shaped attack formation. Similarly, in the sky, a fleet of sky fairies led by Taihe was flying at her.
For a moment, Exploding Patience could not understand what was going on. She could not grasp the enemy's intentions.
Sure, the enemy had been going strong from the start, even surprising them with a secret weapon called the Evil Spirit Army, but the Second Army had not yet collapsed. Likewise, the situation was looking grim for unsightly humility, but he still had a card up his sleeve.
He hadn't released his divinity yet.
The enemy had already exhausted a fair amount of resources against the Second Army. The fairies now made up the bulk of the Federation's main force, so it just didn't make sense that they were using them all against her, without even splitting the forces in half. Being as this was the final war, she understood why they were so desperate, why they didn't want to lose the momentum. Nevertheless, this felt too reckless, even considering they had Sol Jihu on their side. Because the Sixth Army, in charge of the right, was still in good shape, and Twisted Kindness, the chief gatekeeper of the parasites, had not even appeared yet.
Most importantly, the Parasite Queen was alive and well.
What are they thinking? Exploding Patience watched the fairies come closer and closer when suddenly her eyes widened.
A bright and colorful light began to emanate from the fairies' bodies. What?
The light, sparkling in 5 colors, flared like a million suns, swallowing the world in one gulp.
The look of disbelief on Exploding Patience's face turned into a look of certainty. Hee hee. Hee 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 hee. The fairy's laughter echoed throughout the battlefield like a song. Air, water, wind, fire, earth. Spirits of various elements surged like a storm in the sky and on the earth. And when Exploding Patience felt the enormous energy of the 5 spirit lords in the lead. Crazy bastards! She cursed aloud in anger.
But it wasn't over yet. Suddenly, she sensed 2 terrifying presences, one above and one below her. Exploding Patience looked up, then quickly proceeded to pull herself back.
Woo! The sky was splitting open.
And from the opening, a giant hand made of light came crashing down with a terrifying force, leaving a deep mark on the ground.
Unwittingly, Exploding Patience looked down, and the next moment, her face turned pale. Woo!
Because the earth was also splitting open.
She saw a hand made of darkness rising up from the boiling magma. Afinu odor and diffidum odor. The Lord of Light and the Lord of Darkness appeared, as if the 5 spirit lords alone weren't enough.
By then, Exploding Patience was at a loss for words.
She still couldn't tell what the enemy was thinking, but one thing was for sure. They wanted nothing more than to destroy the parasites left. So you really want to do this, huh?
Exploding Patience muttered menacingly and turned around. She had no choice but to withdraw as the enemy intended. She was worried about the spearhead but knew they could hold out.
It can't be helped.
She couldn't possibly leave her post when the enemy was coming at her with all their might.
Resist.
All I have to do is resist.
Within this domain,
time was on the side of the parasites.
The corrupted soil would slowly, but persistently, devour the enemy's vitality.
But even as she reassured herself, Exploding Patience couldn't help feeling anxious. Until this moment, she had never felt so pressured by an enemy who wasn't Sol Jihu. With a nervous face, she began to rouse her energy, gazing at the tsunami of fairies and spirits rolling toward her. Soon, the roars of the Banshee Queen and the 2 spirit lords echoed through the battlefield, and the 2 forces clashed violently.
And then,
it was the 6th Army commander's turn. Vulgar Chassidy's opinion wasn't so different from Exploding Patience's. The front was getting pummeled, and the left seemed to be in danger, too. Should either of the 2 fall, the Parasite Queen would be up next. Of course, there was still the Center Army and Twisted Kindness, but it was her duty as the army commander in charge of the right to stop the enemy before the situation reached a crisis. She speculated that the attack just now must have exhausted the Federation's forces. Now seemed like the right time to make a move. Twisted Kindness or Her Majesty can take care of him, right? Not to mention that she felt uncertain whether she alone could handle Sol Jihu. But when she turned her head toward the Federation's main unit, her thoughts changed. She saw a pack of black-winged figures spread their wings in the distance. It was the fallen angels. Today will be the end of everything. Gabriel spoke calmly, gazing at the 6th Army as it scattered into an offensive formation. If this war ends in our victory, we will ask Valhalla's representative to tell that man our story, about everything we have experienced in this world, and how we fought. Licking her lips, she continued. Should you fall in battle, do not be thrown into despair. The 4 archangels, including myself, will revive you even if it means we have to become the martial god's slaves. Gabriel flapped her wings. However, in order for that to happen, and tightened her grip around the trident, we must triumph in this last battle. Then she soared into the sky like a fallen angel making her way back to heaven. Other fallen angels followed after Gabriel. Are they kidding me? Vulgar Chastity appeared dumbfounded. She wouldn't have felt so offended if the Beastmen alliance came after her. The Beastmen were mighty warriors and also much greater in number than the fallen angels. The enemy could not be more transparent. They were obviously planning to hold her at bay with the fallen angels and a few executors so that their main force could break through the center and the left.
The light flickering across the sky was proof that she was right.
I guess I have no choice but to fight them.
No worries. If twisted kindness can keep that bastard busy while Her Majesty makes her move. The parasites could easily reverse the situation.
And everything would have gone as Vulgar Chastity had planned, had it not been for the two changes she overlooked. The first change was that Co Yuhui was no longer the Co Yuhui of the past. Ha! As Vulgar Chastity roused her energy, she suddenly blinked.
She sensed an alarming amount of holy power gathering in the sky. Walk!
The moment she tilted her chin up, a massive beam of light descended from the sky. Vulgar Chastity's vision turned white in an instant.
Level 9 Saint Empress, Ancient Ritual Prayer.
O light, shine, burn, and cleanse.
What the? The prayer went far beyond her expectations. She had expected a meteor shower, but in reality, the light was shining over the entire right side of the parasite's army. When Vulgar Chastity felt the fluids of her body beginning to boil, she hurriedly raised her energy. Her vision slowly returned, and soon she saw an army of parasites and corpses wriggling with pain as the light burned their flesh. Even the Sixth Army was in danger. They were holding out against the light thanks to the pieces of divinity inside them, but were trapped from all sides by magic circles. The Star of Avarice had joined the Star of Lust in attacking the Sixth Army. Several small groups of fallen angels slammed their tridents into the succubi as they fell from the sky after being hit by magic, and then scattered. Kook! Vulgar Chastity clenched her teeth. She had expected something like this to happen, but not to this extent.
The light showed no signs of fading. It was then.
A huge icicle flew out of the light toward Vulgar Chastity. The army commander managed to grab it with her hair, for she had been on guard all along. This is.
Vulgar Chastity frowned, looking down at the icicle that had barely stopped before piercing her stomach.
It looked oddly familiar.
How do you do? Suddenly she heard a mysterious yet alluring voice. Startled, Vulgar Chastity looked around, until her gaze stopped in the air above her. Bright blonde hair and sea-colored eyes. At the center of the slowly diminishing light, a small witch wearing a conical hat and riding a broomstick was looking down at the army commander with a smile across her face.
You! Vulgar Chastity's eyes widened when she saw the witch.
It has been a while, hasn't it?
Russell beamed.
That's right. To Vulgar Chastity's surprise, Russell was the second card prepared by Sol Jihu. He had appointed Russell as his second servant. Sol Jihu first thought of this method after departing Eva and before joining the Federation at the Hirul mountain range.
Un Yuri visited his tent late at night and asked him about the limitations on who could be appointed as his servants.
She told him that her master had agreed to help them, and maybe, if it was possible, he could appoint her? Sol Jihu had never even considered that possibility before.
Russell introduced herself as a will trapped in a dream world. And Black Sol Jihu, too, was a will from the future.
This meant that if he could appoint Russell as his servant, Black Sol Jihu could also be possibly appointed as a servant. Sol Jihu thanked Un Yuri for the idea, hugged and bombarded her with kisses, and then contacted Gyula through Kim Hannah, who remained in Eva.
And this was Gyula's answer.
There is no limitation to who can become an apostle servant.
A will is no exception.
You may appoint one as your servant, as long as it possesses a strong enough willpower to manifest physically. However, the servant must exist in the same time frame as the apostle. In short, he could appoint Russell, a will of the present, but couldn't appoint Black Sol Jihu, a will of the future.
According to Gyula, the purpose of the future vision had long been determined by Black Sol Jihu.
She told him that, apart from the growth acceleration and the overlapping effect caused by the future vision, there could only be one Sol Jihu in the present world, unless they were inside a special space that did not affect the middle world, such as the path of the soul. The goddess added that even she could not fathom what would happen if he tried to appoint Black Soul Jihu as his servant, and that Soul Jihu needed to be careful before making such a decision.
Soul Jihu understood why Gyulo was so worried.
She was obviously concerned that the laws constructing this world would operate in favor of the parasites. After much consideration, Soul Jihu decided to take in only Russell. It was regrettable that he couldn't appoint Black Soul Jihu as his servant, but there was no need to gamble.
Because Black Soul Jihu had already promised him.
Don't worry about it too much.
Did you really think I'd make you fight her alone? I'll at least make it a 5-5.
That he would fight alongside Soul Jihu in a way that didn't disturb the laws of this world.
And so, Soul Jihu traveled to the dream world and accepted Russell as his servant, with her consent, of course.
Using the authority of gluttony, he devoured both Russell and the dream world and brought her outside.
No way.
By now, even vulgar chastity understood what was going on. Surrounded by the energy of gluttony, the enemy wasn't exactly trying to hide it.
It was just hard for vulgar chastity to accept reality. She wasn't worried about the other bugs, but she was worried about her.
The dreaming witch, Russell Lagrazia, who once single-handedly brought the empire to the brink of destruction. Vulgar chastity had already experienced the witch's strength during the Tiggle Fortress War. Her energy was on par with that of an army commander who had yet to release her divinity.
He held my hand and asked me to be with him.
Oh, how it made my heart pound.
Russell covered her mouth with her hand and smiled graciously. You see, I had no reason to turn him down.
I was curious about the outside world, worried about my lovely pupils, angry at those who snatched my prey away from me.
In fact, I should thank him for asking. Chirping like a lark, Russell suddenly pressed her finger to her chin and tilted her head.
So, I was thinking about how to repay his kindness. Then she glanced at vulgar chastity, who was still frozen with shock. And I've decided to capture and dedicate you to him. What do you think? What?
Think about it. You're the queen of luxury escorts revered by all men. Don't you agree you'd make an excellent present for him? Russell's eyes curved in a smile. This is clearly an opportunity for you. Provide a good service, and maybe he'll come to love you. Vulgar chastity's eyebrows wriggled.
Back when the empire was at the height of its glory, the succubi were treated as luxury escorts. This was the reason she turned to the parasites, and also her sore spot. What's wrong? Having successfully provoked her opponent, a smile spread over Russell's face.
Are you turned on just thinking about it?
You can't help who you are. The broomstick carrying Russell, who was giggling while holding down her hat with one hand, swirled in the air.
Russell then rolled up her sleeves and stretched both of her arms forward, her 10 fingers dancing in the air. At the same time, she began chanting a spell as if she were singing.
It was Russell recital.
Fucking bitch. A fire sparked from vulgar chastity's eyes.
She shouted at the top of her lungs, raising her mana to the fullest.
D.
Vulgar chastity's entire body began to emit fire.
Next whore, please. Russell, too, finished her song and released the spell. An immense amount of steam began to rise from where the flame collided with the ice. Fool. Twisted Kindness, who had been watching them from the rear, frowned in disdain.
Right now, vulgar chastity's primary concern should be to assemble her army and retain the status quo. But instead, she was wasting all her energy on a single witch, letting the enemy control her to their advantage.
Twisted Kindness bit her lower lip. The situation was not much different in other sections of the battlefield.
So far, the parasites had been able to overpower the enemy, mostly thanks to their abundant resources.
Even if the enemy managed to block 1 or 2 attacks, the parasites had the resources to attack 10 more times. And now, for the first time, the resources on both sides were equal. No. The parasites were actually losing this time. The front, the left, the right.
Not one of them was winning, in Twisted Kindness' eyes.
If only the 1st and the 3rd Army commanders were here.
She didn't care at all about raging temperance, but had either Sung Shi-hyun or Abhorrent Charity been here, the parasites would have overpowered at least one of the enemy forces by now. But this was no time to be feeling sorry.
She had to help. Twisted Kindness wished nothing more than to set out.
She could not move, however, because she sensed something strange from the Federation's main unit.
Tension began to rise as she stared at the enemy.
The most powerful warrior of the entire Federation and humanity combined, the ultimate weapon created by the 7 sins to obliterate the parasite queen, Sol Jihu, was finally ready to make his move.
Chapter 467.
The battlefield that was quiet just dozens of minutes ago began to swirl with winds of blood.
Flames erupted from multiple places,
and screams and shrieks broke out.
Sol Jihu slowly turned his gaze and scanned the battlefield.
The vanguard forces of the two sides partook in a fierce battle without backing down. With unsightly humility captured and the vengeful spirit unit taking the lead, the Second Army was being broken through helplessly. At this rate, it would not be long until the vanguard of the Allied force would reach the parasite center army. Exploding Patience was holding her ground rather well. Seeing all the sky and cave fairies, she sent the 5th Army forward as a throwaway while fighting 2 Spirit Kings by herself.
She seemed to be focusing on defending the left wing.
However, unlike the other 2 battlefields, the parasite's right wing was still in chaos.
In favor of the Allied force, of course.
The color of water and fire clashed in the sky endlessly, creating a foggy mist. Meanwhile, the fallen angels were steadily lessening the 5th Army's number. Seo Yuhui was chanting one holy spell after the other, unhindered, dealing wide-range damage to the parasite's right-wing forces.
It looks like good news might come from the left wing first.
Sol Jihu initially thought the Allied force would win in the order of middle, right, and left, but now he felt the order might actually be the opposite. That was how skilled Russell was.
Overall, all 3 battles were going smoothly. Still, Sol Jihu did not lower his guard. Although it was true that they were in an advantageous position, he knew the parasites still had 3 cards up their sleeves. The group of nests that were still producing mother species, Twisted Kindness, and the parasite queen. Furthermore, it could be said that time was on the parasite's side. While they were fighting well, the effect of the corrupted land would only make things harder for the Allied force as time went on. And so, Sol Jihu had to do something while the 3 battlefields were in their favor, something that tipped the scale even further. The enemy's right-wing line has fallen into disarray. A timely report came in while Sol Jihu was eyeing the left wing. The parasite's front and left wing were trying hard to maintain their line of defense even while being pushed back. On the other hand, the right wing, where Vulgar Chastity was located, was slowly getting further from the center army in chaos. This chaotic gap was exactly what Sol Jihu was waiting for. The king said now is the time to charge in. Yes.
Sol Jihu nodded his head.
The preparation is done. Please tell him I will follow suit.
Yes, sir. The beastman who came to deliver White Tiger's message ran off.
It was finally time to make a move.
The card that's left on our side now is.
Sol Jihu looked back at the Allied force while trying to calm his pounding heart.
The first thing that caught his attention was the dwarf squad. They were taking aim with their cannons while eyeing the battlefield with nervous expressions. The dwarf squad had not fired any thunders since the vanguard force charged in as they were waiting for the perfect opportunity.
Vidalov saw Sol Jihu and raised his hand. He seemed to be telling him not to worry about them. Sol Jihu then turned to Seo Yuhui. She was concentrating on supporting the Allied forces' left-wing army.
With her eyes closed, she chanted holy spells endlessly, her left hand placed on her chest and her right hand waving in the air like a maestro. Surprisingly, shining runes appeared in the air with each wave of her hand and began to revolve around Seo Yuhui's body. As more runes appeared, Xiao Yuhui's forehead became drenched in sweat.
She seemed to be in deep focus.
There were many tasks that Xiao Yuhui was entrusted with in this war.
It could be said that she was involved from beginning to end.
Knowing that she must have several things on her mind even as she chanted ancient prayers, Sol Jihu decided not to initiate a conversation.
Representative.
At that moment, Marcel Guionia approached Sol Jihu.
Are you setting off soon? Yes. Oh right, Mr. Marcel Guionia. Sol Jihu gazed at the archer of steel, who had a complicated look on his face.
Before the war, Marcel Guionia had come to ask him whether he could participate in the left wing's battle. Though he did not provide any reason, it was not difficult to find out why. Sol Jihu agreed without saying much.
I hope you can achieve what you want. Thank you.
I am sorry that I cannot be of help. Don't worry.
Also, don't push yourself too much.
Rather than being blinded by greed and putting yourself at risk, I suggest going for a single, sure hit shot.
Marcel Guionia gave a relieved expression. I won't forget it. Sol Jihu smiled as he saw Marcel Guionia place his fist on his chest. He had great expectations from Marcel Guionia.
After all, he was the archer who revived the world tree with a single arrow. Soon, a report was delivered, saying that the Beastman squad was ready.
Sol Jihu looked back at Un Yuri before taking off. When their eyes met, Un Yuri gave him a coy look. Her cheeks and neck were flushed, as though she was nervous.
This was no surprise given that her tasks were just as crucial as Xiao Yuhui's.
Good luck.
HMPH.
Un Yuri turned away and snorted. Sol Jihu tilted his head before turning to face forward again.
He then saw the Beastman squad, which had finished preparing to charge in.
Ku Hung. Kahu Hu Hung.
White Tiger, who transformed into a giant house-sized beast, kicked off the ground with a roar.
Confirming the Beastman squad following suit, Sol Jihu quietly looked back at the Valhalla members.
He then spoke. Let's go.
Just 2 words.
But the moment these words came out, his comrades began to chase after the Beastman squad along with Sol Jihu.
Like the cave fairies, the Beastman squad formed a triangle-shaped attack formation.
They ran in a roundabout way past the enemy's vanguard army to dig into the gap between the enemy's right wing and center army like a sharp wedge. With the appearance of new enemies, there were groups of parasites that dashed out of the right wing.
However, most of the beastmen did not pay attention to them.
They only focused on the goal of the triangle-shaped attack formation, which was to break through to the enemy ranks. Because of it, Valhalla was able to join the fray quickly.
Don't mind the right wing. Leave it to us and charge in. Sol Jihu shouted from the rear of the Beastman squad. Next, Kazuki's voice rang out. The head has clashed with the center army. This was easy to tell, even without the report. It was because Sol Jihu could feel a sharp aura from the outer area of the rapidly charging Beastman squad. Soon, Valhalla's members spotted the parasite center army. At the same time, the sides of the triangle-shaped attack formation separated to the left and the right. Clashing into a group of parasites and corpses, they allowed Valhalla's members to pass through safely. It was at this time that Twisted Kindness understood the Allied forces' intention. Fools! Are you out of your minds? It was true that she did not have an army, but to think they would dare to break through to the center army where she was holding the ground. Twisted Kindness yelled in a fit of dumbfounded anger, but she couldn't help but change her thoughts in the next moment. Just as she tried to turn the troops in the left and the center to surround the right, the parasite soldiers of the center army suddenly fell into disarray. She doubted her eyes when a strange cloud of smoke suddenly swept towards them, but upon close inspection, she saw that it was the Vengeful Spirit unit. Don't stop! Charge, charge, charge! Behind the smoke was Teresa, wearing a blood-soaked armor, and the cavalry following suit. The parasite's vanguard had finally been broken through.
With hundreds of vengeful spirits leading the way, the cavalry pounced on the center army like a raging wave.
It was truly the perfect timing. Twisted kindness gritted her teeth. Sol Jihu and the rest of Valhalla's members ran. Shrieks and screams rang out endlessly, and something flew around in all directions, but they did not pay attention to any of it. They continued to cross the battlefield, only focusing on not falling behind the Beastman squad. How much time went by? As the outer layer of the Beastman squad continued to separate left and right, its initially huge number dwindled to a few hundred. White Tiger, who was leading the charge, was now only 100 meters away from Valhalla's members. And just now, the final layer separated off. However, there was nothing to worry about.
The Beastman squad had performed their role splendidly. An open area could now be seen behind the parasite's center army.
The Allied force had succeeded in reaching the end of the enemy ranks.
The rear of the center army had been broken through.
Kahoo hung!
White Tiger again let out a roar before swinging his front leg and sending half a dozen parasites flying. His white fur was stained red with blood, revealing just how fiercely he fought. One king went past another.
White Tiger revealed his fangs in a broad smile.
Sol Jihu also returned a smile. "Don't worry about us. Don't lose."
White Tiger's shout quickly faded away. Now, only Valhalla was left, but the enemy was also left with only one final line of defense.
"We're almost there."
They were now only a step away from the parasite queen. Sol Jihu slowed down once he caught sight of the enemy. On the other hand, Valhalla's members sped up. Sol Jihu was now running in the center of the team. His teammates were performing the role that the Beastman squad did before. They quickly closed in on their enemies. 200 meters, 180 meters. Kazuki knocked an arrow on his bow while constantly measuring the distance between them. Yi Sung-jin raised his shield with a stiff face. Vlad Halep spun his scythe, and Maria held up her crucifix artifact even while panting heavily. 20 meters. With that, Kazuki shut his mouth. Phi Sora, who was Valhalla's vanguard captain, gripped her sword tightly. "Go!" Then, just as she was about to run forward with her flaming sword held high, her eyes widened at the sight of a warrior running ahead. It was none other than Hugo, charging in with his halberd. Valhalla! A beautiful light burst out as he swung the halberd. Then, just before clashing into the enemy, he struck the halberd down on the ground. Level 6 Barbarian Mighty Warrior, Class Ability, Seismic Wave. Quang! The earth rumbled and shot up like ascending dragons. That wasn't all. The halberd burst with light again, enveloping the rising earth dragons. Swirling left and right, they swept forward like a tsunami. The parasite's final line of defense broke into chaos. Parasites that were hit by the earth dragons bounced up into the air. Everywhere the dragons hit caused a small earthquake, causing nearby enemies to lose their balance and fall. Hugo flashed his teeth in a smile and jumped inside like a beast. Stomping on the squirming, fallen parasites, he swung his halberd like a windmill, cutting and slashing as he pleased, and killed one enemy after the other. The way he fought fiercely without a pause was truly worthy of the name Barbarian Mighty Warrior. Aha! What happened to our muscle brain? His strength was enough to make even Hoshino Urara amazed. It was hard not to be in awe when the enemies were blowing up with each swing of his shining halberd. Sol Jihu had heard just how hard Hugo trained in the Path of the Soul, but he was even better than Sol Jihu expected. It wouldn't be a stretch to say he was on par with a unique ranker. The reason for this was in his halberd. According to Floan, a powerful and beautiful spirit was living inside it. Apparently, the spirit closed its heart at Hugo's past actions and remained dormant, changing its mind only after seeing him climb the Path of the Soul without giving up and ultimately reaching the summit. Hugo had melted the halberd spirit's frozen heart with his pure desire of never letting his comrade die again. Thanks to the halberd,
Hugo inherited a special power of an ancient noble warrior.
Let's go. We can't lose to Hugo now, can we?
Seeing Hugo's performance, Chohong and Phi Sora shot forward at the same time.
Using the manifestation spell, Valkyrie Skirt, Chohong swung the Thorn of Steel, her silver hair fluttering in the air. Quang, quang, quang,
quang. As the mace strengthened with 3 successful enhancements struck the ground, the already rumbling earth sunk in even further. Because of it, the parasites that were only now regaining their balance bounced up into the air again.
War! When Phi Sora stabbed her longsword up, dozens of flaming sword chi waves shot out, piercing the falling enemies and burning them up. With 2 powerful unique rankers joining the opening created by Hugo, the surroundings quickly turned chaotic. Furthermore, each time O'Rahi's longsword moved like a flash of light, and Kazuki and Audrey Basilar's arrows pierced the parasites' heads, the enemy ranks quickly collapsed. All this happened in the blink of an eye.
If we continue at this rate. Watching his comrade's performance, Sol Jihu smiled without even noticing.
It was then he suddenly felt a particular sensation envelope his body.
It's her.
Little Chick poked its head out of Sol Jihu's chest pocket and murmured.
Judging by the way it was trying to squirm out, it seemed to be ready to go.
Sol Jihu carefully gazed at the parasite's slowly collapsing final line of defense. He could see an enraged, powerful existence glaring at him from the middle of the enemy army.
It was the final gatekeeper guarding the way to the parasite queen, the strongest army commander said to be capable of crushing other army commanders with ease.
Twisted Kindness. Chapter 468.
An indescribably powerful energy swept over the rear battlefield in an instant.
It was at this time that other members of Valhalla sensed the appearance of a powerful being. Since only one army commander was unaccounted for, they did not have to look to know who it was. In war, there was no such thing as a moment of peace. It was either kill or be killed. Twisted Kindness spread her wings.
Soaring into the sky, she raised both of her hands, and terrifying energy began to gather as dozens of magic circles appeared in the air. The air turned scorching hot before the sphere that appeared even got anywhere near Valhalla's members. You keep going.
Little Chick chirped after climbing up to Sol Jihu's shoulder.
This is a good opportunity to have a proper fight with that lizard.
Sol Jihu looked confused, seeing Little Chick's confident smile. I evolved into adulthood, didn't I? I'm curious to see whether I will be stronger than the last dragon that is corrupted by evil. It's not that I doubt you, but won't you lose in a one-on-one fight? Shut it. Little Chick frowned. It looked like it wanted to say something but didn't.
There probably wasn't enough time.
Twisted Kindness pointed her hands at Sol Jihu. Just trust me and go. Little Chick kicked off of Sol Jihu's shoulder.
Soon, as a fiery blaze shot out of Twisted Kindness' hands, a brilliant light burst out of Little Chick's body. The blaze that was burning up even space itself could not advance any further due to the light. A huge shadow cast over Twisted Kindness' body.
Flap, flap. Twisted Kindness furrowed her brows as a phoenix radiating a beautiful rainbow light gazed back. The two of them did not waste any time with a staring contest. It was because Twisted Kindness saw Sol Jihu shooting past the phoenix like a bullet. You! Twisted Kindness moved to stop Sol Jihu's advance but was startled to a stop. Shvik!
Just as she thought she would block his path, Sol Jihu accelerated and brushed past her.
He even sent a leisurely backward kick.
HMPH!
Twisted Kindness dodged to the side and tried to grab Sol Jihu's leg. However, I told you to just go. She turned back at a voice that suddenly struck her back. A red-haired insect was shooting toward her with a flaming sword held up. Twisted Kindness' left hand moved like a bolt of lightning. Clang! Phi Sora's eyes widened and then furrowed with pain. She did not even see Twisted Kindness pulling out her sword. Only a scorching pain pierced her palm before the longsword in her hand flew into the air. TK.
A drop of blood fell on her forehead.
When Phi Sora turned her head reflexively, she saw a blade dripping with blood, striking down toward the earth as if to break it in half.
Just as she thought, "I'm screwed," Phi Sora suddenly felt something pulling her back.
Clang!
At the same time, a fire erupted in front of her eyes.
A shining halberd and a thorny mace were blocking the bloody longsword in front of her.
No, it would only be correct to say they were delaying it. "Don't space out, idiot."
Oh, Rahi pulled Phi Sora back before the slowly falling blade hit her. She had given up on attacking Twisted Kindness to help out Phi Sora. When Twisted Kindness' longsword did not stop coming down despite all this, a scythe came flying in and joined the other weapons in blocking the longsword's path. It was only then that the sword stopped. Kiyu! Ook! Everyone groaned. Chohong, Hugo, Oh Rahi, and Vlad Halep. Even with 4 people working together, they could only stop the longsword's advance for a bit. The 4 stacked weapons trembled as if they would break at any moment. Phi Sora grabbed her longsword, which fell from the sky before displaying a terrified face. "Screw off. Don't get in my way." It was because the several dozen magic circles around Twisted Kindness' sword all shone at the same time. It was then. "Out of the way, weaklings!" Twisted Kindness suddenly stumbled back like she would fall. Little Chick had scratched her with its wing. Twisted Kindness minimized the damage by twisting her body to the side, but she couldn't prevent her sword from cutting through the empty air and having the magic circles miss their mark. As a result, Phi Sora and the others could quickly run and distance themselves. Twisted Kindness clicked her tongue. She was a little annoyed with the phoenix, but she didn't want to waste time fighting such insects. She absolutely did not want to let Sol Jihu reach the queen. Of course, she could not imagine the parasite queen losing in her own territory, but this was a man who always turned an impossibility into reality. Because of it, she had a strong feeling that she must not let him through. And so, as she tried to chase after him belatedly, Hoit! She felt her neck suddenly grow chilly. 2 arms and 2 legs appeared out of nowhere and coiled around her. "What's up, lizard girl?" Hoshino Urara smiled beamingly and cut Twisted Kindness' neck with her dagger. "It's been a Kion." Of course, she was caught and thrown off before the dagger could reach Twisted Kindness' throat. Twisted Kindness furrowed her brows. She had planned to slam the girl down and break her spine, but the girl had used her throwing power to turn aside. It was easy to tell that this girl was a lot stronger than the insects from before. She observed the girl, wondering if she was an executor in disguise, but no energy of the 7 sins came from the girl. Seeing Hoshino Urara flailing her arms as she flew off, Twisted Kindness blinked. I snatched it, I snatched it, You can't have it, you can't have it, How could she forget? This was the same girl who kicked her legs into the air and mocked her with a strange dance. Twisted Kindness wanted to capture her and rip her to shreds, but she knew the gravity of this battle. Recalling her original goal, she spread her wings and soared up. The problem was that the phoenix was blocking the way to Sol Jihu. It flew toward her and headbutted her as if to ask where she was going. That wasn't all. A wind suddenly blew behind her. It gathered around Twisted Kindness' leg as she tried to kick the phoenix away, holding her in place. Having lost balance because of it, Twisted Kindness crashed into the phoenix and fell to the ground. What? She looked back dumbfoundedly as she crashed down. Yi Sol Ah's secret art. Leg pulling. She could see another girl pointing at her while holding her leg up like a crane. Her image overlapped with that of Hoshino Urara, whom she just sent flying, and Twisted Kindness unwittingly reached out with her hand. Dozens of orbs shot out of numerous magic circles. HMPH. That's nothing. Yi Sol Ah snorted and spun in the air to avoid Twisted Kindness' attack.
However, Twisted Kindness' attack wasn't like the boulders that rolled down the path of the soul slope in a fixed direction.
To this Yi Sol Ah who surpassed her limits, the orbs that Yi Sol Ah avoided quickly made a U-turn in the air.
Quang!
Ack!
Yi Sol Ah hurriedly twisted her body and lowered her altitude, but she ended up being hit and fell down, screaming.
Aboo boo boo boo.
A trail of blood was drawn on the ground she rolled through. Yi Sol Ah became dazed as she looked up at the sky lying on her back.
Twisted Kindness was looking down at her with a chilling gaze. She seemed to be preparing to shoot down and crush her head. It was then,
just as a hint of hopelessness flashed across Yi Sol Ah's face, Twisted Kindness' eyes suddenly shot open.
She felt an energy shooting toward her like a flash of light from her blind spot. It was a killer move on the level of an ultimate art.
Could it be? Did Soul Jihu come back? Then I can say I succeeded.
Twisted Kindness flew back. This was the first time her body sent such strong warning signals. At that moment, a jade-green light brushed past her stomach. Twisted Kindness' eyes shot open. What forced her to fall back wasn't Soul Jihu. It was a woman wearing a white ceremonial robe. Level 9 Sacred Spear, Secret Art, Reinforced Sword Chi. Twisted Kindness couldn't hide her shock after seeing the energy Baek Haiju emitted from the Tathagata spear.
Even the mighty 7th Army commander could not take it lightly. Then again, even the Parasite Queen would be gravely injured if struck. There was no way Twisted Kindness would be any different.
Ow! Ow! Ow!
Having escaped from death by a narrow margin, Yi Sol Ah tried to get up before falling to her knees.
The spot where she was hit was stinging. Checking on herself again, she noticed that her side was drenched with blood. If it weren't for Aura compressing the air at the last second and protecting her, she would have a beautiful hole right about now. Idiot, can't you tone it down a little?
Don't be so crazy from the get-go.
Maria came running in and healed her. Be careful. Aura warned her as well. You surpassed your limits for the first time in the path of the soul.
However, the enemy we're fighting is someone who has surpassed that limit multiple times.
Yi Sol Ah nodded in silence. She had experienced the difference in their strength firsthand. With a short exchange, she could tell that Twisted Kindness was way out of her league. Oppa fought against someone like her all this time, when he was both weak and strong. Yi Sol Ah wasn't the only one who thought this. Everyone else did as well. Soul Jihu might be able to toy around with army commanders now, but that didn't mean they could as well. The enemy they were facing now was the Parasite's strongest army commander. They had to risk losing everything from a single mistake. And so, they had to focus on withstanding her attacks, not trying to defeat her. The vigor of Valhalla's members changed. Meanwhile, Twisted Kindness' expression sunk as she scanned the Phoenix, Baek Haiju, and the rest of the crew. She wasn't given any opening to use teleport. Everyone was clenching their teeth and trying to force her to stay. At this point, she had no choice but to admit. These people that initially weren't worth looking at were now worth a look, and the ones that were a little worrying were now very worrying. She had not expected to be tied down by anyone other than Soul Jihu. You lot. She knew it was too late to chase after Soul Jihu. In that case, there was only one thing left to do. To take care of the matter here as quickly as possible and go back to the Queen. Fine. Soon, a faint light began to creep out of Twisted Kindness' body. Flash! It suddenly erupted into a blinding light, and Twisted Kindness began to grow in size exponentially. Asterisk. Kuo! A fierce roar resounded in the sky. Dragon roar. Twisted Kindness had returned to her original form. I hope they'll be okay. Will they be able to stand their ground against Twisted Kindness? Should I have helped out a little before coming? All sorts of thoughts swirled inside Sol Jihu's head, but he shook them off in the next moment. He could only see the Allied force winning this war if everything went as planned.
Moreover, before escaping from the Empire, Sol Jihu had asked the others not to do anything foolish like returning to help.
Little Chick had kept the promise. So now,
it was Sol Jihu's turn to keep the promise.
I just have to trust them. Sol Jihu kicked off the ground and flew into the air. He would reach the Parasite Queen at any minute now.
Same time. The Parasite Queen was sitting on the wall, looking down at the battlefield. Her expression seemed both complicated and despondent. Even Twisted Kindness, whom she trusted, was tied down. No, in truth, she knew things would turn out this way. A constellation did not refer to a single star. It referred to a cluster of stars gathered around the brightest star.
Sol Jihu's growth was one thing.
But what the Parasite Queen feared from the beginning was the evolution of the constellation from the effect of the brightest star's light. When she looked up at the celestial bodies now, she could see the stars forming a beautiful galaxy.
The result of this was the scene in front of her. And just now, the star aiming for her throat arrived. The god and the godslayer finally came face to face. Sol Jihu landed on the wall and bowed toward the Parasite Queen.
He then straightened his back while holding the spear of purity tall. The Parasite Queen's eyes glinted.
Is that supposed to be a greeting? She spoke with a light snort.
However, Sol Jihu was still bowing his head without a word.
I must admit, I am surprised. I thought you would pounce on me like a mad dog,
but it seems you've learned some manners since the last time we met.
You have grown a lot. Did becoming an apostle bring about this change? No, not at all.
Hearing the Parasite Queen's praise, Sol Jihu spoke with a respectful face.
It isn't that I am minding my manners. I was just honoring the memory of the deceased. Facing off against you like this was a little touching, you see. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket.
Ah, why don't you join me in doing so, Your Majesty? Let us honor the great hero who sacrificed himself to allow us to meet, the light of the Federation and humanity, our savior, Raging Temperance. The Parasite Queen's brows twitched violently.
Chapter 469. Raging Temperance.
The Parasite Queen was well aware of the Fourth Army commander's shortcomings even back when she first planned the Tiggle Fortress invasion. That's why she ordered him to stay in the spirit realm, which the parasites had mostly finished occupying, to reduce the variables that could affect her mission. But that decision turned out to be the second biggest mistake of her life after she decided to rebel against the martial god. The rampaging Raging Temperance became the reason for Twisted Kindness' defeat. His failure ultimately served as a turning point that led to the resurrection of the World Tree and the parasites' defeat in the Tiggle Fortress War. In short, the parasites lost the war that they should have won easily.
And the rest was history.
Because of one mistake, the future of the Federation and humanity, which should have ended a long time ago, had continued to this day.
The Parasite Queen's face hardened as she recalled the past. It was obvious why the brightest star was mentioning all this. He was attempting to manipulate the situation to his advantage by agitating her.
However, the Parasite Queen was a queen, and more importantly, a god. She wasn't stupid or inexperienced enough to fall for such blatant provocation.
How insolent!
The Parasite Queen only snorted, and then roused her energy as she prepared for battle. Sol Jihu opened his eyes slightly and pushed one corner of his mouth upward. This is our the third encounter. Am I right?
Resting his spear on his shoulder, he began to speak. It sure has taken long enough. Too many obstacles stood between us. But now, I can finally enjoy a one-on-one date with you.
He mocked her in a roundabout way, asking how she felt now that all four of her army commanders were subdued.
Interesting. I see your take on romance is surprisingly peculiar. Do you wish for me to hold your hand and take a stroll around the bloody battlefield?
The parasite queen answered fluently, unaffected by his sarcasm.
That actually sounds great.
You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this date, Your Majesty.
Hoo-hoo.
You sure seem fond of me.
Try me if you want, but I must make it clear that I have no interest in holding your hand, or bearing your child. With a chuckle of contempt, the parasite queen raised her lengthy arm. This was her battle signal. All right.
Sol Jihu, too, straightened up his posture.
He spun and pointed the spear of purity at the parasite queen.
Then he spoke.
I swear on my honor, that parasite crybaby will be listed in the nickname section of your status window.
Parasite crybaby?
Yes.
The parasite crybaby, instead of the parasite queen. Don't you think it's cute? After a moment of silence, the parasite queen's eyes narrowed.
She decided she had been too tolerant for too long. Crazy fool.
It was then. Kwang!
Sol Jihu heard the roar of an explosion. When he came to his senses, he found himself flying in the air. His body had sensed danger and reacted much faster than his eyes could see. He glanced down and saw the parasite queen's palm had struck where he had just stood. Rumble. He felt a chill run down his spine as the wall came crumbling down a beat later.
Had it not been for his intuition, his whole body would have exploded, and he would be dead by now. The parasite queen lifted her chin. Sol Jihu's eyes saw her body. It was common sense that any action required some kind of movement.
For example, the action of jumping required the bending of the knees to push oneself higher into the air.
Likewise, in battles, it was necessary as well as common sense to read the opponent's movements, predict what their next moves would be, and prepare accordingly. But the parasite queen's movements shattered common sense.
She didn't bend her knees, nor did she spread her bone wings.
She only looked at him, and Sol Jihu felt as if he were falling into a bottomless pit. Again, his intuition raised red flags.
He kicked the air and pulled himself back.
Then, as he raised his head, he felt an invisible blade slash down at the air in front of him, grazing the tip of his nose. He didn't even blink once, and the parasite queen was already above him, swinging her arm at his head.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened with shock.
He was moving as fast as he could, but the enemy's attacks kept pouring toward him. This time, even his intuition was too late.
Tong! Sol Jihu managed to activate ethereal shift at the very last moment.
At the same time, he intuitively thrust his spear, emitting reinforced sword chi.
He knew that the enemy would catch up to him again, so he was intent on seeking a counterattack.
But Sol Jihu's prediction proved to be only partly correct. The parasite queen did indeed appear in the Spear of Purity's path, but her fist was carrying an unprecedented amount of divinity. It shattered Sol Jihu's reinforced sword chi and flew straight toward his head. Kwang! Another huge explosion erupted. The air upon which the fist landed wavered before the space itself ripped apart.
Shaking violently, invisible force flew straight through the open space and beyond. Even though at the very last minute he turned his head with all his might, the tip of his hair completely disappeared. Sol Jihu's throat moved as he swallowed. The time he spent practicing mock battles with Black Sol Jihu in preparation for the Parasite Queen wasn't helping at all. In the mock battles, Sol Jihu first scored big, and then Black Sol Jihu chased him with small tricks. But in the real game, he realized that his opponent was superior to him in both fields. Suddenly he remembered Black Sol Jihu's warning. The Parasite Queen? I don't know. It's meaningless to plan a strategy against a god. But if I had to categorize her, I'd say she's better at ranged attacks than melee. That isn't to say that her close combat skills aren't top-notch. Black Sol Jihu seemed less than confident when asked what kind of strategy would work most effectively against the Parasite Queen, which was rare for him. I've only seen the Parasite Queen fight in person a few times. And it was only twice that I actually fought her. The reason I learned seamless sublimity was to use it against the parasite queen.
Because, to kill her, I'd have to land her a blow first.
And to do that, I thought I should first learn to move as fast as she could. So I got rid of all the flaws in my movements and achieved a realm of perfection. But, well, it turned out that I underestimated her. The parasite queen's movements are beyond flawless.
Black Soul Jihu wasn't wrong.
Now that he'd experienced it, he understood, too. Fast wasn't enough to describe the parasite queen. He could see Black Soul Jihu's hand moving during consecutive attacks, but with the parasite queen, even that was impossible. She seemed to defy all norms.
That's why I told you not to copy me. My seamless sublimity failed. But your Trinity Harmony, it might be able to invoke a new possibility.
Thousand stream convergence. Your movement, which ties everything into one, and my movement, which has reached the height of optimization. Maybe there's some similarity between the two. Think about it.
It was then that Soul Jihu finally understood thousand stream convergence.
All rivers flow to the sea.
Differences in motion could be reduced by amplifying other abilities and integrating them all.
Soul Jihu's eyes gleamed.
As he stomped his foot in the air, thousand thunder filled up to the top of his head.
Pang! 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 He activated the Festina earring 3 times.
Everything happened almost simultaneously but in succession, like a thread passing through the beads of a necklace. The next moment, the sound of air ripping rang out, and Soul Jihu disappeared.
And so did the parasite queen. Tong! 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 Quang! 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 Golden thunder flashed and crashed everywhere, and space fluctuated like a tidal wave. In less than 1 second, already a dozen explosions had occurred.
The sheer magnificence of the spectacle stole the attention of the bystanders and caused their jaws to drop.
But of course, Soul Jihu was in no condition to enjoy such luxury.
Is running all you can do?
The parasite queen's voice echoed from all around.
Soul Jihu didn't answer.
He couldn't even open his mouth. He felt something cold touch his stomach. Soul Jihu screamed inside his head as he twisted his body as fast as he could. 4 to 6 my ass. It wasn't even 3 to 7. It was 2 to 8, and even that was being too proud.
The 20% was only backed by the fact that he had yet to use his trump card.
But it was too early to reveal it.
The technique was not something he could use repeatedly, and the moment he revealed it, the parasite queen was sure to raise her guard.
Even this feels too early, but
as much as he knew he had to consider the physical burden, now was not the time to be a miser.
Trinity Harmony alone was not enough.
Amidst the fierce battle, Soul Jihu hurriedly raised his mana output.
Thousand stream convergence. Opening square bracket exclamation mark closing square bracket. The moment Soul Jihu's movement changed was when the parasite queen's face finally revealed a hint of alarm.
But speed wasn't the only thing that was different about Soul Jihu.
Ah!
The space around Soul Jihu and the parasite queen began to crumble. The two streams were crashing against each other, distorting the space around them in the process. Sensing that her flow had been interrupted, the parasite queen flinched for the first time since the start of the battle.
Finally, Soul Jihu found a chance to counterattack. Level 9 Divine Spear, Class Ability, Mana Spear, Sword Chi Flurry. Reinforced Sword Chi fired from Soul Jihu's entire body. Its intensity caused the parasite queen to pull herself back swiftly. It was then Soul Jihu saw the parasite queen's movement for the first time today. Wait, but could that really be called a movement?
She could have stretched her arm just to block the sword chi, or her movement could have absolutely no meaning at all.
No.
But the moment he saw the sword chi that he had fired waver like a heat haze, he became certain that the parasite queen had done something.
It was as if something invisible had penetrated his sword chi.
However, Soul Jihu, who had just barely found a chance to attack, did not want to waste this opportunity. Originally, he had planned to activate the Blessing of the World Tree to negate the enemy's attack and secure a more definite chance to attack.
However, for some reason,
something's not right.
His body was hesitating. This was the first time he had been so alarmed ever since he acquired intuition. He wouldn't be able to block it. He wouldn't be able to evade it. He would die, end of story.
When his thoughts reached that far, Sol Jihu found himself ditching his original plan and thrusting the Spear of Purity forward.
Level 5 Lance of Nemesis, class ability,
Punishing Vengeance Spear. Sol Jihu did not know why he had activated this particular ability. Its effect had changed slightly since its rise in rank, but technically, he hadn't suffered any damage yet. He thought the only way to deal with an attack that causes 100% damage would be to counter it with an ability that reflects the said attack.
Crack! Sol Jihu was right. No, he was almost right. Kook! A grunt escaped Sol Jihu's mouth. He realized that the sound just now had come from his own body.
There was no blood, no visible signs of any injury, but a gut-wrenching pain dominated his entire body, distorting not only his flesh but also his soul itself. The pain quickly subsided after Sol Jihu forcefully raised his energy.
Thank goodness he activated the Punishing Vengeance Spear in time. If it wasn't for that, he cringed just imagining what could have happened.
A small groan also escaped from the Parasite Queen. The same thing that happened to Sol Jihu's body also happened to her body before quickly subsiding. The battle paused momentarily, and the pair each landed above the crumbling wall.
It hadn't been long since the fight started, but the walls had already been more or less destroyed.
Sol Jihu winced as he took a deep breath.
There was a sharp pain in his side.
It seemed that he wasn't completely successful in evading the attack that caused him to use Ethereal Shift earlier, and it scraped past his side.
How?
The Parasite Queen paused in the middle of her sentence and lowered her gaze.
Quack! Suddenly a long scar appeared across her back, causing blood to spurt from it.
The moment the Parasite Queen briefly withdrew herself, Sol Jihu had attacked her projected course with Mind Spear. It was surprising enough that he saw through her curse, but in the meantime, he had also managed to defend and attack at the same time. The scar quickly healed, but the Parasite Queen looked a little shocked.
Still, Sol Jihu did not let his guard down. Fighting her was nothing like fighting the army commanders, which consisted of simply bombarding the opponent with mana. The notion of fighting was fundamentally different. The cause and effect seemed almost unclear. Thinking back now, he had never seen the Parasite Queen fight with all her might. Different. Finally, Sol Jihu concluded that the Parasite Queen standing in front of him was completely different from the Parasite Queen that he fought at Tiggle Fortress. Naturally, he grew warier. So did the Parasite Queen.
Despite the many limitations laid down to weaken her, she was once the ruler of an entire galaxy.
In terms of rank, she was somewhere between Heaven Rank 7 and Heaven Rank 8. Considering that the creation gods were Heaven Rank 9, she was definitely not a lowly god. The curse just now was enough to exterminate an ancient god. She hadn't used all her strength, of course, but she did use her divinity for the first time in a long time with a serious intention to kill Sol Jihu. But her opponent was still standing. Those foolish 7 sins. They've chosen an existence that even they cannot handle, just to exterminate me. The Parasite Queen muttered as if lamenting. It was then that her mana suddenly soared. I can no longer deny that I am also curious how far you can go. Sol Jihu blinked and clicked his tongue. To pay my respects, I shall consider you equal in rank as myself from now on. Because he sensed a renewed determination from the Parasite Queen's voice. No, thank you, you can go easy on me. I'm only a human. You are a god. What are you talking about? The Parasite Queen smirked at Sol Jihu's calm protest. For him to speak like that must mean he still had both the strength to fight back and a card up his sleeve.
Don't be weak."
Her heart began to fill with anticipation. She felt as if she had gone back in time to when she was walking on the path of a conqueror. "Don't tell me your confidence from before is gone?" Quack! 14 pairs of bone wings spread open on the parasite queen's back. Chapter 470.
The parasite army commanders were able to unleash their divinity momentarily to exert nearly the same power as a god. However, it was important to note that the powers they could display were only similar. It was difficult to say that they were actually comparable to the power of an authentic god. Excluding outliers like the martial god, most existences were unable to escape the limits of their mortal beginning.
And so, to put it nicely, it was more accurate to say that the army commanders could imitate gods.
Even twisted kindness was no exception to this.
This was why Sol Jihu felt nervous but also curious. What would a being that was a god from birth be like? And what would a battle between gods look like?
Sol Jihu found out the very next moment that Black Sol Jihu was not lying when he said, "The parasite queen is better at ranged combat than close combat." Millions of glowing particles gathered around the parasite queen. Then, she flapped her wings in a huge motion and shook her hands.
Goddess of parasitism, world destruction. Particles of light scattered out from the parasite queen's body.
The particles were about the size of water droplets, making it look like a snowstorm was blowing around the parasite queen.
For a moment, Sol Jihu was stunned by its beauty.
Hold on. However, Sol Jihu's eyes shot open the moment he felt the energy condense in each of the droplets. His vision turned white in the blink of an eye.
There was no sound of an explosion or even a faint noise. All Sol Jihu could sense was that the scattering particles suddenly detonated with a bright light. And with it, what was hidden inside revealed its true colors. Quang! An ear-splitting explosion erupted a beat later. Each droplet instantly expanded to the size of a house. The explosion was so strong that the space where it took place caved in on itself, turning pitch black. It was indeed an explosion capable of destroying a world. This attack. I can't dodge it, and I shouldn't. The parasite queen's attack was powerful enough to decimate both her enemies and her allies. By the time Sol Jihu processed this, his body was already moving. Several undulations rocked the air, and an orb brighter than the sun appeared. Qua! A supernova materialized, erupting massively in all directions.
The parasite queen's world destruction and Sol Jihu's supernova explosion clashed.
Not good enough.
Sol Jihu frowned.
The parasite queen was superior in both power and range. The light of destruction broke everything in its path, and Sol Jihu's lightning energy storm was bounced back. The authority of gluttony tried to devour the parasite queen's energy but was annihilated instead. This was the first time Sol Jihu saw his supernova explosion being pushed back. So this is the difference in the level of existence.
However, it was too early to be surprised.
Pop! Sol Jihu couldn't even withstand the parasite queen's first attack, yet she was attempting even more attacks. Sol Jihu first thought clouds of black smoke were escaping from the parasite queen's mouth.
But upon closer inspection, he realized that was not it.
Pop, pop, pop. It wasn't just from her mouth.
Black tentacles shot out from every pore in her body and began to dye the area at a frightening speed. Sol Jihu could see thousands of tentacles even at a glance.
Goddess of parasitism, infestation. In an instant, darkness mixed into the world, destroying light. Tong, 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 tong. Sol Jihu used ethereal shift consecutively, but that simply wasn't enough. The surrounding area was already enveloped by the black and white light.
That wasn't all. The black things that shot out of the parasite queen's body looked like tentacles, but they didn't have a physical sensation at all. If he had to describe it, it was more of a gas. When they touched his body, they turned his skin black and tried to invade his body.
Kook!
Sol Jihu grunted.
He suddenly felt his energy going haywire.
The anti-evil energy surged up to incinerate the black smoke, but the parasite queen's energy was fiercer and more numerous than his. At this rate,
I'll be devoured. Soul Jihu began to feel his flow of mana being obstructed. Although mana was still flowing through his circuit, he felt like it wouldn't be long until it stopped completely. The energy of the supernova explosion weakening was proof of his theory. Just what are these things? Soul Jihu struggled to escape the range of the black smoke.
But then, he suddenly stopped swinging the spear of purity.
It was because something happened that made him doubt his eyes.
The parasite queen was preparing another attack. The light and darkness that dyed the heaven and earth were sucked into her outstretched hands.
Spiraling rapidly, they formed into spinning balls in each of her hands. Then, she immediately brought her hands together. Rumble.
As the light and the darkness mixed into one, a frightening undulation resonated out.
It felt like the world was shaking in all directions. No, it wasn't just a feeling. The world was actually shaking. Inside the unstopping rumbling, the parasite queen's 14 pairs of bone wings moved simultaneously. They bent forward and attached themselves to the orb. Next, the orb split into 28 pieces. It was at this point that Soul Jihu realized the parasite queen's previous 2 attacks were only to buy time for this attack. It would be a sure kill move, or at least something close to it. The moment he realized this, the 14 pairs of bone wings, which absorbed the pieces of the orb of light and darkness, were all aiming at Soul Jihu. In the next moment, 14 beams of light shot out from her left wings. Goddess of Parasitism, Coincidentia Oppositorum, 14 Chaos. Soul Jihu's vision immediately turned black. He could not even tell what had happened. He simply felt like he was standing alone in the vast outer space. Of course, he didn't think this was all there was to the attack. Even in reality, a crushing pressure was squeezing him from all sides, and a devouring darkness began to rage inside him. Pyu-huk! Blood spurted out from Soul Jihu's 7 orifices. His body trembled before barely regaining its balance. Ki-yu! Soul Jihu did not even think to wipe the blood off his face. That was the least of his worries. What am I supposed to do? The power, range, and method of the parasite queen's attacks were too different. He was enveloped inside a mysterious space, not even knowing what was happening exactly. He would much prefer to fight a bloody battle of fists and blades. Because he didn't know how the parasite queen's attacks worked, he didn't know how to react. Of course, he didn't have any time to complain. Damn it! Soul Jihu gripped the spear of purity and began struggling to dismantle the darkness. He cut and slashed wantonly with Mind Spear, secured his own domain with limitlessness, and twisted the surrounding flow with thousand-stream convergence. It seemed whatever he was doing was effective as the outside world began to appear little by little. Now this is unexpected. It was then that the parasite queen's voice resounded in the space. Acting so wildly even inside 14 Chaosphere. Such a thing should be impossible unless you've died thousands of times. Very well. See if you can withstand this. A chilly voice rang out. Soul Jihu could faintly see the parasite queen in the distance. Her right bone wings twitched and shot out another 14 beams of light. Kadek! Kaduk! A frightening crunch resounded out. The hair on Soul Jihu's body stood on end. The darkness that thinned also became thicker in an instant. Soul Jihu turned around in a hurry. Only then was he able to see what was happening. His body was assimilating into the darkness before he noticed. He could see the future where he would perish after struggling futilely. I screwed up. Soul Jihu gritted his teeth. The parasite queen said she would consider him her equal. It was wrong of him to hold back when his opponent, who was stronger than him, was going all out. There's no other choice. Soul Jihu wanted to wait until there was a perfect opportunity, but the situation wasn't in his favor. If he continued to hold back, he might really die here. Sol Jihu collected his breath and fixed his posture.
Then, he steeled his resolve.
Right, it shouldn't be so easy to conquer the final boss cum secret heroine.
Soon, a brilliant golden light began to emanate from Sol Jihu's body. He had activated the Spear of Purity's 7th stage, Spear God. Same time. Sol Jihu and the Parasite Queen's battle was affecting the rest of the battlefield.
Dee-da-doo-doo-da-doo-doo.
The ground suddenly rumbled as if an intense earthquake broke loose.
Mother Teresa's Horus, which was valiantly stirring the center army, lost its balance and fell.
A parasite tried to approach Teresa while she was pinned down by the fallen Horus, but its fate was no different.
It could not hold its feet and stumbled down in an unsightly way. The parasites and the allied force turned their gaze while swaying in all directions.
They knew they were in the middle of a war, but they couldn't help but focus on the battle at the rear, knowing its pivotal role in this war. They were also curious about just what they were doing to make the environment like this.
Teresa blinked as she got up in a hurry.
The first thing she saw was the destroyed capital.
However, this wasn't surprising in the slightest. It was because she could see a far more shocking scene in the distance.
The sky above the capital had caved in on itself, and 28 rings of darkness were spinning around a single spot.
What was even more shocking was Sol Jihu, who was standing in the middle.
Half of his body had been invisible, but then a dazzling golden light suddenly burst out of his body. Not only that, a large golden orb formed behind Sol Jihu's back, pushing back the black rings, and then expanded in size after tearing the rings into pieces. At the same time, thunderous lightning roared in the sky.
Supernova explosion. Thousand thunder.
Hell severing.
An explosion erupted out, destroying the Earth's axis and rippling out in all directions.
Heaven and earth shook, as did the entire world. Finally, escaping from the barrier of chaos, Sol Jihu immediately prepared his next attack. At this moment, Sol Jihu was not the spear of a god, but the god of the spear.
Already. Gabriel gulped while observing Sol Jihu closely.
She had looked over after feeling his level of existence skyrocketing, only to witness an intense battle taking place.
She could say that the Allied forces' plan has been a success so far. Never mind the vanguard and the left and right wings, even Sol Jihu was holding back his opponent better than she expected. The plan wasn't for Sol Jihu to defeat the Parasite Queen while everyone else held the army commanders back. It was the opposite. The Allied force had to seize victory while Sol Jihu was fighting the Parasite Queen.
During the War Council, Sol Jihu said he would fight the Parasite Queen alone, and Gabriel judged that this was too reckless. As the former chief of the 4 archangels that once oversaw the heaven realm, Gabriel knew better than anyone else what kind of existence the Parasite Queen was and just how powerful she was.
Even though her strength would be repressed in the lower realms, a single human could not possibly fight a heaven-rank 7.5 god in her own territory.
However, what she believed to be impossible was happening in front of her eyes. Despite cutting things dangerously close, Sol Jihu was holding his ground just barely.
That said, that was all he was doing.
There was no way that the human body would be able to withstand a divinity for long.
He might be borrowing the Spear of Purity's authority to do so, but there had to be a limit. And so, it was absolutely necessary for the other battles to conclude in that time before the Parasite Queen defeated Sol Jihu.
The surest outcome at the moment is Valhalla was having a hard time against Twisted Kindness.
It was also the only battle where the parasites were in an advantageous position.
Unsightly Humility and his army were standing strong despite being broken through, and Exploding Patience, whom everyone believed could be the second Raging Temperance, was holding on surprisingly well.
In that case,
Gabriel glanced at Vulgar Chastity. It was also around this time that Vulgar Chastity regained her senses after being infatuated with Russell.
At this moment, Sol Jihu kicked off the ground and leapt toward the Parasite Queen.
Surrounding him were hundreds of reinforced sword chi.
A golden shooting star hurled towards the parasite queen. Flash!
Vulgar Chastity could not sense what happened next, but she could see the result clearly. Soul Jihu soared into the sky after disappearing from her view for a moment, and the parasite queen was sent flying back.
Kung!
The parasite queen crashed deep into the ruined capital.
Ah!
Seeing a dense cloud of dust rising from the ground, Vulgar Chastity's complexion paled.
It was only then that the situation entered her eyes.
What did I just do?
She had fallen for the enemy's provocation, and this was the result.
The right wing, which she was in charge of, had fallen into chaos. The center army had been driven into disarray, and Soul Jihu had succeeded in reaching the parasite queen.
Ah! Ah! No!
This shouldn't have happened.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Your Majesty.
Vulgar Chastity trembled from being toyed with but was at a loss for what to do.
However, her fluster only lasted a moment. I'll
be right there. I'll take care of these insects and return to your side right away.
Her purple hair began to rise as the surrounding air began to boil. Seeing Vulgar Chastity's eyes rolling back, Roussel quickly glanced to the side. There, Gabriel grinned faintly and quietly nodded her head.